Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was blind but controlled all 4 elements? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. All men are not created equal. That was a fundamental lesson Izuku Midoriya learned at a very, very young age. Izuku understood there were many things he did and didn't know. He understood that his mother loved him with all her heart, but he didn't understand why his father never looked at him with the same kindness. He didn't understand why his father left for days at a time, and would never tuck him into bed or read him stories or any of the things his mother did. He didn't understand why his quirk hadn't come yet, but Kaken's had. He decided to ask Kaken at school the next day. Kaken knew everything. He even had a really cool quirk and everyone knew he'd be a great hero. He might even be on All Might's level one day, but Izuku, privately, doubted that. No one was better than All Might. It's because you aren't eating your veggies, Deku. The old hag says my quirk came faster because I ate all mine and all you eat is Katsudon. Kaken said when Izuku asked him the next day during recess. Miniature explosions followed, as if to prove his point about veggies was absolute fact. Izuku wasn't convinced, but when he saw how brightly Kaken's eyes shone with confidence, he couldn't help but smile for his friend. Okay, you're always right, Kaken. I should ask Mom if I could eat more veggies. Then my quirk will come. Izuku said with the confidence of All Might himself. Wonder what I'll get. My mom can bring small objects to her, and I think she said Dad has a fire-breathing quirk. Maybe one of those? Or it could deviate, it's not uncommon. Or it could be a combination of the two. A combination could potentially be useful for both mobility and offense, but that would depend on how it would work, Izuku mumbled, getting more and more lost in thought. He could soon feel eyes burning into his back, glaring at the young boy mumbling to himself, while his only friend wandered off to boast his quirk to literally anyone who would listen. Izuku stopped mumbling when he heard someone calling his name, looking around rather confused as to where his friend had gone and who was calling for him. Looking towards the source, he once again heard his name being called by the teacher. Embarrassed that pretty much the whole playground had heard, he sheepishly made his way towards her. He heard someone snickering to themselves as he passed his classmates. Quirkless Deku is in trouble. Izuku could feel hot tears threatening to fall, shame, fear and confusion all bubbling up and pouring out when he responded with, "I'm not quirkless," which came out much meeker than he wanted it to. As he entered the building with his teacher, he knew the tears were falling. What he didn't see, however, was the young Bakugu searching for the culprit who made Deku cry. When he finally found them, some boy who had a mutation quirk, it wasn't pretty. The young Bakugu was out for blood, and the grass around him was singed from the explosions he'd caused until one of the other kids ousted the culprit. An angry Bakugu was a Bakugu no one wanted to mess with, especially if Midoriya wasn't around. Listen here, brat. No one calls Deku but me. He isn't quirkless. He just hasn't had enough veggies yet. So, shout your goddamn mouth and keep to yourself. I bet his quirk will be way better than whatever yours is, you dumb extra. Contrary to what he had heard his classmates say, Izuku was not in trouble, although it took his teacher a good 10 minutes to calm him down long enough to actually tell him that. After calming him down, the teacher turned to their office, leaving Izuku sitting alone in the hallway with no adult, no clue as to what was going on and his thoughts running rampant. To Izuku, it felt like he'd been sitting in that hallway forever, though it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. Izuku could hear hushed voices from the office, and he saw all the adults run around like it was the end of the world, which just left Izuku more and more confused. His confusion only greatened when he heard a familiar voice call down the hall, making their way towards the office. "Hey Squirt, why are you up here? When the school called, I figured the brat gotten into another fight." Izuku could only sniffle in response, shaking his head in confusion, tears threatening to reappear, and it didn't go unnoticed by Mitsuki Bakugu. Mitsuki could be called many things, an angry woman, an aggressive coworker and a wife, but for the past 5 years, she was, most importantly, a mother. The mother Bakugu could tell something was off about the whole situation, and she wanted nothing more than to burst into the office and start demanding answers as to why she was pulled away from her job when her brat wasn't even in trouble this time, but that would have to wait. Right now, there was a little boy who was scared and confused who needed a Mama Bakugo and his Auntie Mitsuki. She knelt down to Izuku's level, cupping his cheeks so he would look at her. She could see his frustration and confusion as he looked to her. She spoke with a soft voice, usually reserved for Izuku, when he was either crying or about to cry. "Izuku, sweetie. Did anybody hurt you?" Izuku managed to choke out a response between shaky breaths. "I'm okay, Auntie. But no one will tell me anything. I want mommy." Mitsuki could hear her heart shatter at his response. "I know, Squirt. I'll handle this, I promise." And with that, Mitsuki Bakugo stormed the kindergarten office with strength that could make all might quake with absolute terror. "Listen up. Someone is going to tell me why the hell I was called here when my brat isn't in trouble and why no one's told the Squirt anything. Mrs. Bakugo, please keep your voice down. Izuku can still hear you," an office aide said in a confidently annoyed tone, which would have been an impressive feat against an angry Mitsuki, if it wasn't for the fact it was in a hushed whisper and the aide in question was cowering behind another coworker. A voice Mitsuki didn't recognize spoke up, interrupting whatever insult might have come out. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to have the school call you, but this is a very urgent matter. You see, the boy's mother listed you and your husband as his emergency contacts, and I'm afraid there's been an incident involving her and the boy's father. The school thought it best to have a family friend on campus while we're waiting for word on his mother's condition." Mitsuki looked to where the new voice came from, wanting to keep herself composed for Izuku's sake, even if he wasn't directly in the room. The speaker was a young man. Mitsuki guessed he was fresh out of high school, in what she thought was the most ridiculous outfit she'd ever seen. If Mitsuki wasn't so focused on getting answers for Izuku, she would have recognized the boy as a UA graduate from previous sports festivals. But only two things registered to Mitsuki that truly mattered. Inko's husband had done something, and Inko's condition, whatever it may be, prevented her from getting her son. "What do you mean, an incident? What did that BSU do to her?" She could feel herself trembling with anger as she spoke. Her best friend could be hurt or worse, and they sent some kid to tell her son's school. Mitsuki was beyond furious, and she was ready to storm out of the building and hunt him down herself, until the small voice of Izuku spoke up from behind her. "Auntie? Auntie, where's mommy?" Izuku had gotten tired of waiting and pushed through the legs of adults, confused and just wanting his mother. He didn't care if he'd get in trouble. He wanted to know. Izuku wiped the tears from his eyes, looking up expectantly. "Izuku," Mitsuki began, but couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. The fiery woman was at a loss for words and was unsure how to proceed. Izuku was a sensitive child, she knew. If it had been Katsuki, she could have been as brazen as the child, which would have been far easier to handle. Thankfully and surprisingly, Mitsuki didn't have to say anything. The young man in the ridiculous outfit stepped forwards and bent down to see Izuku. "Hey kiddo, I'm present Mike. Your mom talked about you a lot." Mitsuki could see Izuku's eyes widen and how he listened with rapt attention, clearly recognizing the name from somewhere. Probably a hero thing, if Mitsuki had to guess. "Where's my mommy? I want my mommy." Izuku managed to sniff. In any other circumstance, Izuku would have been bouncing off the walls, personally meeting one of the newest heroes to graduate UA, but the 5-year-old was just that, a 5-year-old child. Mitsuki was surprised with the gentleness in the young man's voice as the name clicked. "Present Mike, the voice hero or something?" Mitsuki gave up trying to keep track of all after Katsuki had developed the inevitable hero fascination, Izuku's quickly following. "I'm not gonna lie to you, your mommy isn't feeling too hot right now, but the hospital will make her all better in no time. I was asked to come tell the grown-ups what happened, so everyone could get to go see her. Is that okay?" For a brief moment, nothing happened as Izuku processed what had been said. He didn't understand what present Mike meant about her not feeling good. Izuku didn't understand any of it other than his mother was in a hospital. She was fine when she left him this morning. Present Mike is a hero. New as he is, there's no reason for him to lie about anything. maybe I just didn't notice? Oh no, I didn't notice she didn't feel good. What do I do? What should I do? How do I make it better? Mitsuki heard the beginning of a muttering ramble and saw how red Izuku's face was becoming, which usually meant Izuku was on the verge of a meltdown. It had taken Inko and herself months to figure out how to handle Izuku when they couldn't prevent the meltdown. Mitsuki pushed the young hero aside. He could handle the hero work because right now, Auntie Mitsuki was needed. Izuku, I need you to look at me squirt. Remember what we do when we're frustrated and upset? Izuku could only nod as he started taking deep breaths, trying to calm himself down. Kaken always said he was a crybaby. It took a couple minutes, in which there was a young voice hero who was at a loss for words, a mother seething with anger attending a child that was not her own, and an office full of adults who seemed at a loss for words or actions. But eventually Mitsuki worked Izuku down from meltdown territory. Better squirt. Izuku didn't trust himself to talk, and simply nodded. Mitsuki let out a sigh of relief. She wanted nothing more than to grill everyone there for almost making him cry again, but she didn't want Izuku in the crossfire. The first plan of action was to get Izuku out of the office and earshot. Tell you what, squirt. I'm going to talk to all the adults about really, really boring stuff, and you can go find Katsuki. When I'm done, I'll come get both of you and we can have a sleepover at my place after seeing your mommy. I'll even make katsudon. How's that sound? Izuku nodded numbly, making Mitsuki's heart ache for the small boy. Even so, she led him to the door and watched him walk down the hall towards his classroom. As soon as she felt it was safe, she turned to the remaining inhabitants of the office and growled viciously. Where's Inko and what did the Bisu do to her? Hisashi Yamada had been training to be a hero for years, and while he had a few months of actual experience under his belt, he couldn't help but feel nothing but pure terror in the face of this Mitsuki Bakugo. He had a few run-ins with some nasty villains, but he had to admit they paled in comparison to this woman. She was a mother out to protect a child left in her care, and Hisashi didn't know if that made her safer or dangerous. But he had been given a mission coming here, or rather, Shota had been given the mission, but didn't want to be around any small children, so he'd saddled it to Hisashi, and so he would do his duty. Hisashi took a deep breath and faced down the angry mother auntie. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I must ask for us to move to a private room. This is very sensitive information. Mitsuki could only grunt in response, following the young hero and two police officers who had been watching everything unfold quietly off to the side into an empty office. When the door closed behind the officers, Hisashi spoke first, not wanting the woman to go into a screaming fit before he could tell what he was allowed to say. Mrs. Midoriya sustained some first and second-degree burns to her chest and torso, as well as some broken bones and a minor concussion. We've had people with healing quirks at her side ever since she reached the hospital, and she's expected to make a full recovery, with some minor scarring. She insisted on leaving the hospital to collect her son, but a lot was taken out of her. The doctors insisted on keeping her on bed rest for a couple days, just so they can keep an eye on her physically and mentally. Mitsuki was not impressed, but visibly relaxed into her seat. Inko would be okay. Izuku still had his mother, and that was a wonderful thing. But there was a sinking sensation in her stomach that a part of her wanted to ignore. God, she wanted to ignore it. But for Inko and Izuku, she couldn't. She had to ask the question. You mentioned Hisashi. What does he have to do with this? The look of sadness and anger that fell on the young hero's face did not escape Mitsuki. That sinking feeling worsened. Hisashi, as you called him, was responsible for the injuries sustained by Mrs. Midoriya. You see, there are a handful of agencies that have been tracking down a growing ring of villains for quite a while now, and we have reason to believe he's their ringleader. Mrs. Midoriya was acting as our informant on his behavior at home. His likes and dislikes, what she knew about the ins and outs of his quirk, his habits, and she even snuck us a DNA sample from a hairbrush to confirm he was our man. Seeing as she was a great help to our investigation and as a token of our regret that we couldn't have gotten there sooner to protect her, my agency is going to pay for all of her medical bills. We understand how inconvenient it was to take you from your work, but our records show your husband was good friends with Hisashi and introduced him to Mrs. Midoriya, who is a good friend of yours. We can't afford the risk of Hisashi finding out where she is. I hope you understand, ma'am. Hisashi expected the woman to let her anger take over and explode. But Mitsuki had other plans. There would be time for anger later, she knew that. The safety of her best friend and her family came first. Do you know where he is? Does he know where Inko is? Hisashi leaned forwards, resting his hands on the table between them as he spoke slowly, deciding to try and choose his words. Carefully. Afraid not. We were setting up a sting to get all of them, but it didn't go exactly as planned. We nabbed most of his men, but he wasn't where he was supposed to be, and he got away before we could get there. There are heroes searching the city for him as we speak, but we had to make sure the little guy was still at school before launching a nationwide search for him. If we did it before checking with the school, I don't want to think of what would have happened. Mrs. Midoriya was worried sick about him. Normally, I wouldn't be here and the police would take care of it. However, a licensed hero protecting her son was the only thing we could promise that managed to relax her enough for the healing quirks to do their jobs properly. My job now is to escort you and the little guy to the hospital to see her, and then to your house. Rest assured the police are going to guard her hospital room day and night until we catch him and are sure it's safe. We'll also have heroes patrolling the area around your house and neighborhood far more regularly, and police will monitor your home, in case he tries to go after the little guy. Mitsuki nodded in understanding. It would make sense he'd try to go after the squirt. Of course, if the heroes and police failed, she was more than happy to send him exactly where he belonged. After all, no one hurts Inko and gets out unscathed. Okay, sounds good. Let's get the squirt to his mother. I don't want to come back again, so my brat is coming with us. Mitsuki said as she stood decisively. Not waiting for an answer, she turned and left the office, leaving the police and hero to follow her lead. Hey office lackeys. I'm taking the squirt and my brat early. Mitsuki yelled, furiously signing paperwork to release the two children early. Hisashi thus found himself in the strange situation of following an angry mother down a kindergarten hallway. They passed almost every single classroom in the school, all of them themed around some kind of animal, he noticed, when they finally stopped at a colorful door that read, Lion Class, above. Mitsuki didn't hesitate in throwing the door open and yelling into the classroom of small children. Brat and squirt. Get your stuff, we're leaving. Hisashi couldn't help but laugh at the two small voices that responded in unison. Shut up, hag. Okay, auntie. Inko Midoriya was not a stupid woman. She knew her husband had been hiding something from her, though the reality of what he was hiding was far worse than what she feared. Truth be told, she had been certain he was cheating on her. The late-night business trips, disappearing for days at a time, and the resentment he seemed to hold towards her baby boy. Hisashi insisted on keeping away from Izuku on the grounds that he couldn't handle the boy's quirk lessons, despite the many X-rays that pointed to the contrary. After all, he wasn't grown up yet. Izuku still had time to develop his quirk. Inko felt worse and worse as Hisashi drifted farther and farther away, and one late night, Inko couldn't help herself. She knew sneaking through her husband's belongings was wrong, but Inko reasoned that she just had to know the truth. With Hisashi asleep a few rooms over, Inko found herself sifting through her husband's study, looking over every file and scrap of paper she could get her hands on, until the corner of a scrap of paper caught her eye from her husband's inside jacket pocket. Inko didn't dare breathe as she unfolded the paper. Do not disappoint me, Dragonfire. I might take that curriculous brat of yours under my wing if you do. Perhaps he will not be as disappointing as his father. Tutsi. Inko didn't recognize the handwriting or the signature. What Inko did recognize was Hisashi had talked about Izuku to some stranger, and that stranger was interested in taking him. Inko could feel the anger rise within her and turned to the papers with renewed vigor. Whether or not Hisashi was cheating no longer mattered. From here on out, Inko was searching for anything about this mysterious note writer and anyone who might sound shady or from someone she didn't recognize. No one threatened to take her baby, especially a friend of Hisashi's. Inko made sure she was mindful of the noise she was making, despite her anger, and checked the clock on the wall. If she wanted to protect Izuku, she had to be careful. She most certainly couldn't afford to skip anything. Every piece of information she could gather was crucial, and that meant inspecting the desk, despite how silly it seemed to her. She had been there with Hisashi when they bought this desk. But Inko couldn't afford to ignore if anything was amiss. Inko's diligence paid off, finding a loose panel in the desk's side cabinet and a stack of hidden files, all of them filled to the brim with damning information on various people she recognized as villains, some shopkeepers Hisashi frequented, and even Inko herself, though it was far smaller and the only information was her care for Izuku and suggestions on how to separate the two. Inko shuddered with fear and rage. Her husband was working with, or had dirt, on villains, and had been talking to some toxic fellow about her son. Inko was not a stupid woman, but she was a mother, and whatever fear she felt would have to wait. Izuku came first, no matter the cost. She took a shaky breath, gathered the information she found, put all of Hisashi's other papers and files back where she found them and tiptoed outside of the house. Inko didn't know what she would say or do, but she had to get this information to the right hands. And so, she drove to the nearest police station in the dead of night. Inko was glad the receptionist was kind to her, a small, anxious woman coming into the station in the dead of night, asking calmly what the problem was. "Well, you see, I thought my husband was cheating on me and I know it's wrong, but I went through his study and I found something meant for him, but addressed to Dragonfire by someone who called themselves Toxic. I know it sounds silly, but it mentioned taking my son and I can't lose him. I found these files in his desk too. They were hidden under a P panel, and one of them is about how to separate me from my son. And my husband is still asleep at the house, and I didn't think it was safe to take my son with me. I know it sounds silly out loud, but please. I'm worried for my son." Inko knew it sounded weak, even through her own stuttering, but she'd rather die before she let anything happen to her boy, and she shoved all the information she had found on the receptionist's desk. Mitsuki had always said Inko was a crier, and Inko could feel the tears threatening to form, but she wouldn't let them. She refused to cry when her son could be in danger. The receptionist seemed surprised, looked at the information on the desk, and she seemed to recognize something before standing and coming around the desk to put her hand on one of Inko's shoulders. "Thank you for coming forwards, ma'am. I need you to wait here while I give this to some investigators. I'll let you know when someone wants to speak with you. Everything is going to be just fine, ma'am, don't worry." Inko nodded, sniffling as she took a seat. Part of her wished she'd grabbed Izuku before leaving, but another part of her knew if Hisashi woke up and noticed both of them gone, he'd be on to her and she couldn't risk it. She would be home before either of them woke up, she'd have to be. Inko only had to wait for 10 minutes before the receptionist reappeared, asking her to follow her. She followed quietly, unsure of how to proceed as she was led to an office towards the very back of the police station and was left with a quick introduction to the tall, black-haired man at the desk. "Hello, Mrs. Midoriya, my name is Detective Tsukachi. I understand you brought some concerning files from your husband's study because you were worried about your son, correct?" Inko nodded quietly, speaking far more calmly than she felt. The fact there was someone willing to listen to her was greatly appreciated and she felt safer explaining everything she could. "Yes, detective. I don't understand any of it, but my son's safety comes first. I wouldn't have brought anything that would seem out of the ordinary or coincidental. I've noticed my husband's odd behavior for some time now and I was so scared he was cheating on me, but when I saw it mention Izuku, I couldn't do nothing. He's every inch of my heart and my entire world, sir." Naomasa had to admit Dragonfire and his men were slippery snakes, and he'd admit this woman impressed him. 6 months of investigating dead ends and all of a sudden there was a pile of fresh leads delivered in the dead of night by a possible lead worried about a child. He hadn't meant to stay as late as he did, but he was glad he did. He knew this was a golden opportunity, but he really didn't want to force anything onto this mother. He took a breath as he explained what he could. "Understandable, ma'am. Normally, it would take a few days, maybe even a few weeks, to go through all the information you've provided to hold up the credibility, but lucky for us, I happen to have a note from the same man your husband has, as well as the fact my quirk lets me know you're telling the truth about everything you've said to us. To our knowledge, Dragonfire is the name of a villain who's heading a rising ring of villains, and we had a hunch he'd try to get in touch with some dangerous people, although the safety of your boy does make this all the more urgent. This is going to be dangerous, but we may need you to help our investigation. You're close to him, and as far as he's aware, you have no clue as to what is going on. If you don't want to help, that is completely understandable, and we will do everything in our power to protect you and your son. The choice is yours, Mrs. Midoriya. He waited with bated breath, sensing the woman mulling over his words and looking at her options. He was surprised by the determination in the small woman's eyes, and she looked up at him. Izuku comes first. Call me Inko, detective. After all, I have a feeling we'll be talking to each other quite frequently. And so here she was 2 months later, resting after Hisashi had found her. She was tired, not only from the pain and the toll of all the healing quirks, but just from the events of the day. She had been told Izuku was okay and was on the way with Mitsuki and Katsuki. She would let Izuku stay with Mitsuki while she recovered, feigning an illness so Izuku wouldn't worry more than she knew he would. He had inherited her sensitive nature and was easily upset, but she loved him all the more. Inko knew if the heroes and police couldn't stop Hisashi, Mitsuki would. And with that thought, Inko Midoriya drifted off to sleep, comforted by the fact her husband wouldn't be able to take her son as long as she still had a say in things. It was a full week before the doctors allowed Inko to go home, partly because of their worry over the healing process, and partly because the police could keep an eye on her in case Hisashi tried anything. The last anyone had seen him, he got within a 5-block radius of Izuku's school before a heated battle with law enforcement before sacrificing his men to make an escape. Izuku himself had stayed at the Bakuga household with a cold that day. Mitsuki had been furious when she found out, demanding the police inform her sooner next time, so she could send the BSTRD to hell, according to the official police reports. When Inko was released, it was decided the Midoriyas would stay with the Bakugas for the foreseeable future, provided the house was protected 24/7 by police, various heroes, and even some heroes in training from UA, the principal had insisted, stating it would test the students' patience and observation, though no one was really certain what the true reasoning of the bear rat mole creatures was. Inko was grateful for the extra protection nonetheless, and Izuku couldn't have been happier, questioning every new hero or hero-to-be he came across, piling all the information into his notebooks, which he proudly showed off to anyone willing to listen, much to the youngest Bakuga's dismay. For a while, it seemed like everything would be okay. The police were hot on Hisashi's tail, and the Midoriya family were being protected in more ways than one, but, unfortunately, life isn't fair. It was a beautiful summer day, and Inko was enjoying the sunshine. She had managed to convince the police to escort a family outing for Izuku's birthday to the aquarium, and Mitsuki had insisted Katsuki tag along, to which Izuku had been ecstatic. It had been very trying for him the past few months, Inko being unable to tell him where his father was or why there were heroes and police around all the time. She just wanted to see her baby smile and be happy again and enjoy himself. So with a little help from Detective Tsukachi, she'd planned for a big surprise at the aquarium for Izuku. Inko didn't want to think about Hisashi finding them, real as the threat was. Today was her baby's day, and there was a pro-hero tailing them. Inko had never heard of them, but Detective Tsukachi said they preferred it that way, being some kind of underground hero or something, and they'd be able to protect everyone if they caught sight of him. Inko could allow herself to relax today, for Izuku's sake. Izuku himself wasn't overly fond of looking at fish, if he was being honest, but Kaken had been interested when the aquarium was mentioned, claiming he wanted to see the sharks, and Izuku didn't want to upset Kaken. Everything changed, however, when they ran into the building and, after being lightly scolded by his mother for running off, to which Kaken scoffed. "It's fine, Auntie. I was with him." Inko gave a scalding look, which both surprised and terrified the young Bakugu. "Katsuki Bakugu, do not talk back to me. Running off where I can't see either of you is dangerous, and the last thing I need is your mother after me. Do you understand?" Izuku felt pity for Kaken, although if he ever let it show, he knew he'd regret it. Scolding from his mother was nothing short of soul-crushing. Kaken thankfully mumbled, "Yes, Auntie. Sorry for making you worry." Inko smiled at the boys. She truly did love both of them, and she knew that despite all the teasing, they would have a strong friendship for years to come. "It's okay, Katsuki. Once we get inside, there's a special guest leading a tour today. I think you'll both like him. Now no more moping, let's go have some fun." With that, Inko took the boy's hands, with much grumbling from the ashen blonde child, and went inside. As she suspected, Izuku's eyes widened with awe as he saw that the aforementioned guest was none other than Gang Orca. Inko had heard he would get calls all over the country to lecture at aquariums and that his next stop in an attainable and safe distance happened to be on Izuku's birthday. Inko noticed all the children trying to steer clear of the orca hero, which she understood. They were children after all, and she knew he was pretty intimidating even to adults. He looked distracted and sad, Inko thought as they got closer, before Izuku's cry of delight caught the hero's attention as he broke away from Inko's hold. Not that she was worried now. Lecture or not, a pro hero was a pro hero. Izuku should be safe. Gang Orca? No way. Kaken, come on. Hey, don't leave me behind, Deku. I told Auntie I was going to protect you, idiot. Inko could only chuckle as she followed the two children and went straight to the hero, looking up to the hulking figure. I'm sorry about them, sir, they're just excited. I didn't exactly tell them why we were going to the aquarium. Inko smiled, ruffling Izuku's hair and smiling. She didn't need any kind of quirk to see the delight and relief in the hero's eyes as he looked at her than the children who would have begun roughhousing if it wasn't for the woman stepping between them. I see why they would be, ma'am. Truthfully, I was afraid most parents forgot about today. But no matter. I promise your boys will be fully informed and safe here, he said, looking to the two boys and smiling as he knelt to their level. Might I inquire what your names are, young men? The boys responded in tandem. What's it to you? I'm Izuku and this is Kaken. I'm 6. Gang Orca chuckled and stood looking at the group of 3 before him. Well then, I see no need to waste any more time. Let's go, young ones. Inko followed quietly, smiling when Izuku would look back to ensure she was still there as he spouted all the facts he knew about Gang Orca and his quirk, before the hero promised to give an autograph for the both of the boys before the day was out. In hindsight, Inko would regret not being more careful. Izuku, happier than he'd been in months, was far too recognizable. He was spitting facts he knew and Inko wasn't paying attention to her surroundings or the people surrounding. If she had, she would have realized someone in the back of the crowd starting to follow them. Hisashi hadn't expected to see his wife and the quirkless brat at the aquarium, because if he was being truthful, he'd forgotten the brat's birthday until that moment. His mission was pretty simple, in his opinion, get Gang Orca out of commission. After all he had to do was dry him out with his fire. But plans changed when he heard the Diamond brat spouting his facts to the hero. Kid had always ticked him off with those Diamond rants of his. He knew that Weirdo's disguise quirk would wear off soon, and if he was going to get busted, he might as well do some real carnage and teach the brat his place once and for all. He smiled a twisted, crooked smile that only someone who had lost every inch of their soul could smile as he felt the disguise wearing off, his own features becoming more and more apparent. Breaking free from the crowd, he ran headfirst towards Inko's little group, catching the pro-hero off guard. He was still smiling as he turned and grabbed the nearest brat, which he was pleased to see was his own. He could barely hear Inko's screams over the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears as he opened his mouth and laughed. Happy birthday, sport. And with that, he let his quirk loose as the child in his grasp turned to look at him, eyes wide open in horror. Izuku didn't understand what was happening and now, all he could feel was pain. Everything was going dark through the white-hot pain and he didn't know where his mom or Kaken were. He could feel himself fall to the ground before a swift kick to his stomach sent him flying across the room. People were shouting and though he couldn't see anything, he got the strangest sensation as he made contact with the ground. It was like the world itself was trembling with fear and in that fear, he could sense his father's footsteps. He could sense everyone leaving, and he could feel the heat of his father's fire in the air. There was a metallic taste in Izuku's mouth, as he gasped for air and called out in fear. Kaken? Mommy? Someone? There was just more yelling and Izuku was sure no one had actually heard his cry, but he could feel the trembling getting farther away. The pain was unbearable, his vision almost completely black, save for a small speck of light, coming from what he knew was his father. Izuku wanted to pass out and let everything go dark, but a single, cry cut above the commotion that caught his attention. "Deku? Deku, where are you, you idiot? You Kaken." Izuku couldn't let himself go just yet. Kaken was looking for him and everyone was in trouble. Everyone was in trouble and Izuku couldn't do anything, and he wished with all his might that he could help. The last thing Izuku remembered before the world went dark and painful was the ground trembling, getting stronger around him, and the air rushing around him. Aizawa knew he should have listened to Hisashi and walked with the DMN family instead of tailing behind. Now, not only did he have to waste 15 minutes convincing the DMN security and staff he was a pro-hero, a feat only accomplished after several phone calls to police and his agency, despite the fact he had his stupid hero license on his person, but he lost sight of them and the very guy he'd been sent to protect them from had attacked the kid. The one thought he had as he pushed through the crowd was that he was never going to hear the end of it. Once he was free of the crowd, Aizawa finally got a visual on the target, just as he was readying another attack on Gang Orca. He briefly wondered what he was doing here before he focused all his energy on the man before him, knowing Hisashi's attack would never come as long as Aizawa could help it. Hisashi was, quite understandably, confused. He didn't exactly have time to ponder why his quirks suddenly didn't do what he told it to before the hero he had been beating took the chance to fight back. Aizawa was grateful for his capture gear, doing everything he could to keep the man at bay while Gang Orca pummeled him, neither man willing to risk giving the man an opening. From somewhere near the exit, Aizawa barely registered a child calling out for a Deku as he fought. He couldn't afford to blink, not until he could feel the man go slack in his capture gear, both heroes breathing heavily. It was then Aizawa noticed the crackle of fire and the rush of wind behind him, as well as the trembling he previously thought of as adrenaline was also coming from the other side of the room. Turning, he saw what would haunt his dreams for years to come. The Midoriya kid bleeding profusely, eyes seeming to glow as bits of rubble and fire surrounded him in a miniature vortex several feet off the ground. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening to the kid, and they had to act fast. Gang Orca, call for an ambulance. The kid's quirk must have manifested during the attack. I'll stop the kid from hurting himself with it, but his eyes look to be in bad shape. Once you've got the ambulance, make sure that man doesn't escape. He had to act fast if there was any chance of saving the kid from the blood loss, but falling from that high with those kinds of injuries could prove fatal. He had to be careful, running closer to the kid as he readied himself before activating his quirk. The rubble fell to the ground as the wind and fire dispersed. The kid fell limply into the ready capture gear, Aizawa looking on in horror. The kid's face was badly burned and the bleeding seemed to be slowing down, although he wasn't willing to risk anything as he tore the kid's tattered shirt and used the pressure on the wounds. The kid cried out weakly in pain and Aizawa could feel his heart sink. The kid was still awake, through all that pain. Hang on, problem child. It wasn't the most comforting thing he could have said, he would admit, but it was all he could think to do as he stood and ran towards the exit as policemen flooded the room to take the attacker into custody. He found himself thinking desperately as he pushed past them all, looking for the ambulance and the kid's mother. Please hold on, kid. You're not done here yet. Shota Aizawa was a young underground hero, and he desperately wanted this child to survive. It was his fault for not being with them to begin with, and if this kid died, Shota didn't think he could call himself a hero. He finally spotted the paramedics off to the side, assessing the small cuts and bruises of various people, his path blocked by panicked bystanders, and Shota wasn't having it, shouting at a volume he didn't think he could reach. Move! Injured kid, get out of the way! Luckily, mercifully, that did the trick. The crowd parted. And he ran though, cradling the child as if he'd turn to dust at any moment. Shota set him onto the stretcher and he couldn't deny that the kid looked terrible as the paramedics swarmed the kid, speeding off towards the nearest emergency room. As he watched them speed away, Shota couldn't help but feel a pit of despair and guilt in his gut, deciding to glare as the officials dragged the man who had attacked the kid out of the building. 7 months after the arrest of Hisashi Midoriya, the villain known as Dragonfire on charges of illegal quirk usage, conspiracy with known criminals and the assault of his son, Izuku Midoriya, he was convicted and sent to jail. Shota learned that the boy would live, but his vision had been destroyed. Izuku Midoriya was officially, legally blind with a quirk. He could no longer learn to control the way every other child. From what everyone could gather, his quirk stemmed from ancestral elemental quirk users on both sides of his family, converging into a single 4-element quirk. Quirks are dangerous things, and quirks that manifest in stressful situations, as the young Midoriyas had, were prone to acting out or becoming stronger faster than their users would be able to handle. Izuku would need special trauma counseling and, surprising to authorities and the hero communities, quirk training from Eraserhead, who would be able to monitor the boy's quirk in case he lost control at any point. It wasn't easy, but over the years Izuku would fully and completely control his quirk. Shota noted he would refrain from using his fire as much as possible, although he couldn't exactly blame the kid, as well as make a discovery that would change his way of viewing the world around him, so to speak. Izuku's love of quirks lead him to experiment often in the privacy of his room or when he and Aizawa were together. It was through this that Izuku learned he could feel the vibrations of others through the ground, which accounted for the fear trembles he recalled feeling at the aquarium that day. With his feet bare on the ground, he could navigate as well as any seen person. It took a lot of work, as well as some threats and/or requests from both Inko and Mitsuki, but several months after Izuku's mastery of this vision, he had a license to accommodate his public and constant quirk usage, even if it was only just a portion of it. Just hold on to my arm, can it? There's a step ahead, Deku. Izuku groaned aloud as he was dragged towards the train by his friend. He knew Kaken was just trying to help, aggravated as he sounded, mumbling about how useless he was on the trains. I know Kaken. I can sense the gap, we've been over this. It's just the stupid train itself I have trouble with. Izuku's mumbling wasn't a lie. He could sense the gap between the train and the train station itself. Izuku had learned to see through vibrations, but vehicles had their own kind of vibrations and the speed from them disoriented Izuku to no end. That was where Kaken would come in, keeping watch on the stops' names, keeping track of the distance. Izuku could technically navigate on his own using the station's braille, but he was less certain in their directions, whereas Kaken was a constant rock that guided him when he needed it, but Izuku knew Kaken wasn't always going to be there when he needed him. That day at school, the explosive boy had gotten in trouble from another fight, leaving Izuku to wait for him outside, which usually invited the bullies Kaken had tried to fight. Hey, look at Midoriya. Waiting outside like a lost little puppy as usual. Did you see Bakuga's face when I called you what you are? But wait, you didn't see that. He could sense the kid who stopped to the left of him. Izuku didn't bother to turn his head in their direction or even acknowledge them. From the smell of fertilizer coming off of them, Izuku guessed they had some kind of plant quirk, not that he cared anymore. Quirks had fascinated him as a kid and, to an extent they still did, but he couldn't exactly get excited when he couldn't see them, having to go off of how they smelled and what he could sense from the person through the ground and, more recently, how they reacted with the air waves. Well, when he was alone at least. If Kaken was with him, the boys would record quirk observations together like there was no tomorrow, Kaken providing visual descriptions while Izuku would rattle off his ideas for how it could be used, what potential weak points were and whatnot. It had been many years since Izuku had written his observations in a journal, opting instead to record his thoughts on the fly, his room having shelves and shelves of hero archives he'd recorded. His personal favorites were the ones he did on All Might and Aizawa, though he would actually die if Aizawa ever heard the recording. Izuku regretted not paying full attention, because the next thing he knew, he was being held off the ground by some kind of vine and he was going to panic. He was in the air. His feet were off the ground and his solid vision just disappeared. He could hear the kid laughing as he cried out in a panic, sensing the low amount of heat radiating off of them, as well as feeling the push and pull of the kids breathing as they laughed. Put me down. This isn't funny. He could hear the getting closer as he struggled, trying to think of a way to escape with the now limited senses. He knew he'd have to talk to Aizawa about training his other senses to be as accurate as his solid vision was. He knew the kid was pretty new to the middle school, but there had to be a reason why they were doing this. You know, I've heard stories about what happened to you, Midoriya. About how your old man took your sight and laughed. They told me it was so bad you started wearing that visor, just so people wouldn't have to look at your pathetic face. I just want a little peek behind those shades, then I'll let you go, or I might not. Villain's kid did just threaten me after all? Izuku was in a crossroads. If he used his quirk, they could say he attacked them. If he didn't, they'd see his face, something he never wanted to show anyone after that day at the aquarium, going as far as to refuse to cut his hair so that those around him wouldn't have to keep seeing the limp, defenseless boy who'd cry out in the hospital for his mother, unable to ever see her again. Izuku didn't know what to do. He couldn't fight back without confirming what everyone thought about him as a villain's kid, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode and hurt everyone. Izuku braced himself for the worst when he heard a familiar voice shouting from the direction of the school as the faint smell of explosive sweat reached him. "Hey, a-hole, get away from him." Kaken's detention was over, and he was said. He spent the past couple of years protecting Deku, knowing full well the idiot wasn't going to defend himself, getting detentions, which were more of a formality than anything. The teachers loved Izuku and let the young Bakugo off lightly, knowing he was protecting the boy, unable to do anything without proof. How could they punish such blatant examples of a hero in the making? And now the very kid he'd clobbered earlier was back to torment Deku again. Despite his brash nature, Katsuki was not an idiot, and it didn't take an idiot to know why Deku hated his face and hid behind his hair and the diamond visor thing Auntie had found him, even if he could never see it himself. He had scarring. And anyone with a shred of decency would know to never ask about it or bring it up. He was still trying to convince Deku to use his fire more openly to defend himself better, but that took patience Katsuki didn't think he had. After getting him down on the ground again, Katsuki had an idea, noticing his friend's sour demeanor. "Hey Deku, we got a stupid test that we need to study for. Let's walk to that food place with all the cats and study there." Izuku knew he must have been showing his bitterness if Kaken had suggested that. Kaken hated walking to the cat cafe, which Izuku loved. Aizawa had taken him there on occasion after training, swearing him to secrecy as to the true origin of the discovery. He smiled, nodding as he turned to leave, having learned the fastest route by heart. He was stopped when he felt something sharp in his foot, stopping to remove whatever it was, years of walking barefoot preventing him from feeling whatever pain it might have inflicted upon him. Kaken growled in annoyance, noticing what he was doing and suggested, for the millionth time it seemed, something he was against profusely. "You seriously need to invest in some shoes, Deku. Shoe companies make support articles for heroes all the time. Some thin soles shoes or something shouldn't be that hard for them, idiot." Izuku grimaced at the idea. Sure, he knew it would be easy for support companies to think of something, but custom shoes for daily use, rather than hero work? It was bound to cost a fortune that neither he nor the Bakugas had, or they would have bought them for him ages ago. He muttered something about the expenses needed for such an item as they walked into a back alley they knew was a shortcut. 2 steps in and Izuku stopped, tensing as he reached out to stop his friend. Both boys were quiet as Izuku focused all his senses on the surrounding area, something in his gut telling him that danger was near. The air was normal, save for the rise and fall of the boy's breathing. The moisture in the air gave no sign of anything unusual, but underneath the ground, Izuku could sense something not entirely solid nor completely liquid was moving, and he didn't like it, unable to pinpoint a solid mass through the ground. He knew what he had to do, grabbing Kaken by the shoulder and pushing with all his might towards the other end of the alley, moving to follow. "Something's underground. Run." But it was a little too late. The not quite solid or liquid mass he sensed underground now surging upwards behind the boys, lashing out and engulfing the 2 boys. The creature laughed at his luck, finding 2 new toys to cause trouble with, enjoying the potential of a backup in case he expended the others' quirk usage. "Come now, boys, it's rude to just leave me on my lonesome. And you're both so stressed. What do you say we hit the town and paint it red?" The boys could do nothing. Izuku couldn't sense anything but the wind rushing around them as the monster villain sped through the alleyways, his hands and feet encased in the sludge and the constant jostling keeping him disoriented, while Kaken couldn't use his explosions without risk of hurting Izuku. The boys were trapped and the villain was laughing at the heroes who eventually came when he forced Kaken's quirk to hurt anyone who got close. Izuku felt like crying, struggling with all his might to break free and stabilize himself. Distantly, he heard the heroes shouting and a crowd gathering, but nothing was happening except more and more destruction. Why wasn't anyone doing something to save them? How could they not save them? Izuku didn't know what to do, but he could hear Kaken struggling, and through the overpowering smell of smoke and sludge, the unmistakable smell of iron mixing with the smell of Kaken's sweat. The sludge villain was forcing Kaken's quirk to quickly and with more and more force, causing blood to enter the mix when sweat wasn't coming fast enough. He knew it was dangerous of Kaken when blood entered the mix, and he knew it made his explosions deadlier and deadlier. Izuku had to act before the monster ended up killing Kaken, his struggle renewing with vigor and anger. He would not let that thing kill Kaken, he would not die today, and he sure as hell wasn't going to sit by idly like the heroes standing nearby. With every ounce of strength he had, Izuku clawed and clawed at the sludge, being just liquid enough for him to sense where it would break into the air, and, with a single hand freed from the sludge, summoned all the air he could and pulled as his hand went inwards. Never fear, children, for I am Dash. The gust of wind summoned cut whoever was speaking off as it freed both of them, flinging the sludge villain across the street, splattering across a wall, unmoving. Kaken had passed out, falling to the ground with irritated red arms with small patches of skin bleeding. Izuku fell to the ground, heaving in the air as the world's vibrations came back to him, giving him a sense of direction, noting the vibrations of a large figure in front of the crowd, and Izuku had watched enough videos as a child to have the speaker's voice and appearance seared into his mind. All Might had come to save them, and Izuku had jumped the gun with his gust of wind. Izuku could feel his heart pounding in his chest, certain everyone else could hear it as well. All Might, the number one hero, was standing in front of him, and Izuku was certain he was going to be mad at him. He had used his quirk in public to bring harm to another without a license. Izuku gulped as the hero approached, sensing some kind of energy humming around him, cutting through the air, each step booming in the eerie silence. "It's all right, my boy, you're safe now. Everything will be all right." The gentleness in All Might's voice surprised Izuku. Shouldn't he be angry? Why wasn't he angry? Izuku had knowingly broken the law, causing harm to another. He was just like the villains. All Might should be yelling at him and handing him to the authorities as a villain, just like his father. All Might himself hadn't expected the boy to cry, and he had been a hero long enough to know it wasn't from relief. The boy was crying in fear, as another boy he assumed to be his friend was passed out beside him. He took another step towards the boy, knowing the crowd was watching and most likely recording, much to his annoyance. There was an injured child, a villain to clean up, which the heroes who had been standing by had begun the process of doing, a child crying out of fear, and all they could do was record because All Might was there. He spoke gently and quietly, so only the boy could hear him. "My boy, why are you crying? No one here is going to hurt you. Your friend will be okay, I promise." The boy sniffled, not raising his head to meet All Might's gaze, speaking so quietly he was sure the boy was simply mouthing the words and noise was escaping. "Why aren't you angry at me? I used my quirk to hurt someone else without the proper license. I'm no better than a villain. You should be yelling at me." In that moment, All Might's heart shattered, knowing only bullied child would think self-defense was punishable. Being quirkless as a child, he knew that pain all too well. All Might could tell that this boy, whomever he was, had been broken time and time again, picking up the pieces to glue back together in silence, and All Might wasn't going to let him break again, not when he had done something truly heroic in the face of great danger. Kneeling to ground, he reached out and put his hands on the boy's shoulders, speaking not as All Might, but as a man grown from the pain he could tell the boy felt, not needing the boy to say it. After all, heartache recognizes heartache like one would recognize their own reflection. "Young man, I would never, ever yell at someone who hasn't done anything wrong. What you did was incredibly brave, my boy. You acted when everyone here stood by idly. You listen to me now, you are not a villain. You used your quirk in self-defense to save another in need, and while there are laws requiring licenses for hero work, there are also laws to protect those who use their quirks when they act in self-defense. You did nothing wrong, and I will personally vouch for you if anyone who tries to paint you as a villain. No one is going to yell at you, my boy, because I am here." The boy cried harder than before, and All Might, not caring for those behind them, sheltered the boy from everything in a gentle embrace. All Might didn't budge or draw away until the boy was ready, helping him to stand. Noticing the boy's bare feet, had the villain taken the boy's shoes as he took them? The boy didn't move, standing in the middle of the alleyway before raising his head to where All Might's eyes were, visor meeting his intense blue eyes as he spoke, voice shaking and stuttering, but All Might could sense the determination behind the boy's words. Izuku had to know from the man he looked up to all his life. He had to hear it from the mouth of All Might himself. All Might, please wait, I have to know something. My name is Izuku Midoriya, and when I was a child, a villain took my eyesight. Did you think someone like me, someone whose past is as mine, could I be a hero? In that moment, at those words, All Might was not the #1 hero, symbol of peace. At those words, he felt as though he was once again a young man without a quirk, looking to Nana as she turned to face him. Could someone like me be a hero? He remembered asking her. He remembered the desperation in his voice, wanting more than anything to be a hero anyone and everyone could depend on. Yagi Tashinori, in that moment, saw himself in the young boy who was so scared of becoming a villain. Young Midoriya, it is not the events of the past that determine what makes a hero. The past may be riddled with mistakes or experiences, good or bad, we must learn from them. You may have lost one sense, but your other senses learned to grow stronger in its absence. You have a good quirk, but that is only part of the battle, my boy. You must be able to think your way through life and battle. Even I cannot resolve all conflicts through sheer strength alone. There are times when I must think before I act. And above all else, what makes a hero great is what they feel in their hearts. I do not act because I want money or fame or, despite many who would say otherwise, a death wish. I act because it is the right thing to do. You acted today because your friend was in danger, as well as the lives of everyone here. You acted when no one else would because it was right. So, to answer your question, Izuku Midoriya, you can become a hero, no matter your past, so long as you are willing to be ready to fail and learn from your mistakes, my boy. Izuku thought he couldn't cry any harder than he already was. He was wrong. Izuku felt himself fall to the ground, clutching his chest as he sobbed tears of joy and relief. He could feel arms wrap around him once again, and he couldn't care less if the whole world was watching him cry. A few hours after the attack, the whole world would, in fact, see him crying. Later, at the hospital, Izuku made up his mind as he and Kaken waited for their mothers to come get them. He knew what he wanted, what he needed to do with his life. Vision bead med. Izuku Midoriya wanted to be a hero. Kaken? Yeah, Deku? I want to get into UA. I'm going to be a hero. There was a moment of silence before Kaken spoke next, hiding the joy in his voice as anger. Well, no shit, Deku. I told you we were going to be the best hero duo, didn't I? Once we get out of here, we're going to train together. I know the old hag will get us what we need if you ask her, Deku. If we start tomorrow, we'll have about 2 years until we take the entrance exam. Inko and Mitsuki were not happy to learn their boys were on national television, being held hostage and used by a villain. It took both the insistence of Detective Tsukachi and Aizawa to stop both women from going to the prison to hunt down the villain responsible for hurting their boys. Upon arriving at the hospital, Mitsuki didn't have the heart to chew her son out for allowing the villain to catch them as she entered their room to see both boys in an intense debate on quirk and training strategy, the young Bakugo insisting that Izuku would be stronger if he just used his DMN fire to his advantage, to which Izuku was saying how useless and time-consuming it would be when he could just trap people in the ground. It didn't surprise either of the mothers. They'd seen the news and the videos of All Might's speech to Izuku. Both mothers knew they would have their hands full for the next few months, once again dodging the press who would undoubtedly want to know everything said to Izuku by All Might, dodging villains who might see a potential challenge in the boys as well as the boys themselves as they would begin to prepare themselves for the UA entrance exam that was 2 years away. To say the next year and a half was challenging for the two boys would be an understatement. For 7 months after the sludge villain incident, reporters hounded the two boys day and night trying to get statements and interviews, claiming that the world wanted to know more about the kids involved, their quirks and daily lives. The reporters only left after making the mistake of ambushing Mitsuki in the early morning before she'd made her coffee. To this day, Mitsuki would proudly show off the restraining order with a gleam in her eyes, pointing to the frame above the Bakuga household's fireplace whenever a friend or neighbor would suggest that the boys do an interview or something because of their experience. The boys only slightly missed the ambushes, claiming their escapes were perfect training for surprise attacks and testing their stamina. During those 7 months, Izuku would train with Aizawa, insisting he learn as much martial arts as possible before going home to show Kaken a more aggressive version of what he'd learned, knowing his friend's fighting style was focused more on strength and aggressiveness rather than speed and precision, as Izuku would focus on. On top of all the martial arts training and reporter dodging, Kaken had devised an alternate training regime for Izuku that he thought was genius. Every day after their sparring, homework, and reporter dodging, Kaken would drag his very unwilling friend down to the beach where everyone dumped their trash and let the boy get to work, navigating the sandy terrain with thinly soled shoes he forced onto his friend's feet. He might have been doing this to help his weird shoe phobia solid vision on not-so-solid terrain, but he wasn't about to let his friend get an infection because of some trash he'd step on. He wasn't a dumbass like Deku, and slowly clean the beach. Kaken would help, of course, when he'd see something dangerous that his friend hadn't noticed or mentioned yet, quickly moving it out of harm's way, and on the 6th month of their training, the beach was completely cleared. By that point, Izuku could navigate the sand without fear of falling, the sols providing enough of a surface to clear his vision on the shifting sand, which was too soft for the vibrations to travel properly, giving everything a fuzzy look to him. Giving a triumphant yell, Izuku stood to where he could feel the sun's warmth, unable to see his friends smile at the feeling of overcoming a great obstacle before Kaken tore down that accomplishment in an instant. Not a shitty job, Deku. Now shoes off. Time for phase 2. What? You heard me, Deku. If you're running around shoeless and happen upon sand, you won't be able to slip your shoes on in the middle of a fight. You're gonna navigate the beach with just your quirk until it's as clear as my voice. Got it, dumbass? Izuku groaned aloud, complying as he felt his feet sink into the sand. As it turns out, Kaken's phase 2 wasn't a bad idea, and Izuku knew Kaken was right as usual. Their training continued, and after another 6 months, Izuku could navigate the sand as confidently as he could the sidewalk. The two boys grow stronger in both strength and spirit, Izuku feeling more confident than he ever had, which did not go unnoticed by those around him. Even his bullies seemed to back off, resorting to harsh words with no action, surprised when Izuku would retort in kind, although Kaken was never successful in his attempts to get the boy to swear. Izuku knew better than to swear where he'd get caught, not wanting to risk the wrath of one Inko Midoriya. Izuku and Kaken would continue to spar together, learning and growing and becoming closer and closer than they ever had, to the point where bystanders would often ask if they were related. Izuku thought it was hilarious and made a game out of it. How long until this stranger realizes we aren't related? The current record was a month, Izuku convincing Kaken to play along until the boys' mothers broke their record. They still recorded hero journals together, Kaken taking a new interest in Izuku's thoughts after explaining why they were so important. You can't rely on strength all the time, Kaken. If I learn everything I can about a quirk on the fly, it makes it easier to discover how to negate the quirk without hurting anyone. If I didn't know you, for example, I'd have to find out your quirk, how it worked, and the best way to negate the threat in a mere few seconds. Any hesitation or overthinking could lead to injuries or worse. Rushing in without any knowledge of what you're up against is stupid and will no doubt end up doing more harm than good. Only fools rush in, Kaken. Katsuki had to admit that it made sense. Fighting was only half of the battle, and while he was sure he could pass the hero course practical exam, the written test was another thing entirely, and they wouldn't include it if having half a brain wasn't an important part of being a hero. He knew what he'd have to do if he wanted half a chance at being a decent hero, and while he didn't like it, he knew Izuku would never let him live this down if he didn't swallow his pride, as Izuku did on the beach. Could you help me with that quirk assessing thing you do? Not that I need your help, but you're more into that nerdy crap and I won't be able to bounce ideas off of you during the exam. He was glad Izuku couldn't see his embarrassment from admitting a weakness, but the smile he saw on the other boy's face was well worth it. Izuku was always an emotional kid and wore his heart on his sleeve, even when he tried to hide it. Sometimes Katsuki wondered why he would so readily share his facts and his knowledge, but would try to hide his more negative emotions. Izuku may have been blind and hid behind a visor, and that diamond hair he refused to cut, opting to tie it out of his way, when he remembered, that is. But Katsuki had known him since childhood, and Izuku couldn't hide the sadness that would cross his face from his best friend. The boys studied and trained, while taking daily runs on the beach, the sand not only an obstacle for Izuku to navigate, but soon they would have to dodge beach goers and reporters investigating who had cleared the beach and why they had felt that need. Izuku's conversations with Aizawa expanded his understanding of the exam, not gaining specifics but a general understanding that the practical was rigged in favor of those with destructive or physical quirks. Inko knew her boys wanted to go to UA more than anything, and she had no doubt they could pass that practical with flying colors, but she did have to worry about the written exam. On Mitsuki's insistence, Inko called UA with her concerns, surprised the now famous present Mike remembered someone like her and that he actually listened to her worried intently. Hey there, listener Inko. I totally dig your concerns for the little listener, and your requests are gonna go straight to the main man himself. Yeah. I'm sure something can be worked out. Inko couldn't help but smile as she waited on hold. It seemed only yesterday to her that present Mike was a young man, saying things like, "Yes, ma'am," and "Of course, ma'am." And now he was a famous hero with a radio show and a teaching job to boot, always trying to be hip with the kids, as Mitsuki would say. Inko called Izuku over to her as he entered the door, noting how he smelled vaguely of sweat and the sea, quickly explaining what she was doing and what she was worried about. Izuku nodded in understanding, too embarrassed and proud to admit he had the same concerns and had planned on doing exactly what his mother had later on. After putting the phone on speaker, the hold music stopped and a voice spoke up. "Hello, Mrs. Midoriya? This is Principal Nezu at UA. Our present Mike said you had some concerns about the entrance exam's written portion, correct?" "Yes, sir. As I told present Mike, Izuku is blind and he was worried that a computerized version of the test would be a distraction to others around him. We were wondering what could be done so that he can take the exam without disturbing others, or any other ideas and suggestions that would be available." There was a pause on the other end as they heard some papers shuffling before the principal spoke again, sounding rather cheery. Of course. What kind of school would we be if we didn't allow everyone to show us what they're capable of while giving the best support to ensure they are, indeed, doing their best? I have a few suggestions if the young Midoriya would be willing to listen." Both Midoriyas let out a sigh of relief, listening intently to the principal, putting out any information they could give that would help the principal. After a near hour-and-a-half phone call, the three worked out how Izuku could take the written test to the best of his abilities and, before anyone knew it, the day of the entrance exam was upon them. Izuku and Kaken walked together like they always did to the train station, ready to handle whatever lay ahead of them. Izuku was pretty sure he was going to die of embarrassment before he even took the exam. One moment everything was fine, the next thing he knew he was falling forwards, silently cursing Kaken for forcing him to wear shoes that had shoelaces. He waited for the impact that never came, the air around him changing drastically as he felt a light tap on his shoe. The air vibrated with some kind of field of energy that Izuku guessed was some kind of anti-gravity quirk, based on his not falling. Behind him, he heard a girl's voice speak as hands moved him in mid-air so that he was standing straight before releasing the anti-gravity field they had put him in. "Are you okay? I'm sorry for using my quirk on you without asking, you just looked like you needed a little help." Izuku turned to the girl's general direction, making sure to smile. He couldn't afford to look weak to anyone, especially today. Even so, Izuku was still a little awkward around girl, semi-shouting a panicked response before making his escape, smelling and sensing Kaken close up ahead. "No, don't be sorry. You saved me from looking like an idiot before we even got inside. Thank you very much. You're here for the UA exams, right? What am I saying, you're here and using your quirk? Of course you are. Sorry to trouble you. Good luck." Neither one of them had time to think about the strange encounter with the other, running towards the entrance of UA, papers to admit them on campus at the ready. Izuku could feel his heart pounding with anxiety as he and Kaken walked forwards to a desk where people were waiting, handing over their papers. There was a pause before a woman's voice spoke cheerily. Okay, so here's your testing card and your exam room is the third door Bakugu. Midoriya, here's your testing card and if you would follow my associate here and he'll take you to your exam room. Good luck, boys. Izuku nodded, sensing a second person stand and walk out from behind the table and stood to the left, waiting for Izuku to follow. He paused, turning to Kaken, his best friend, partner in crime, and at this point he might as well be his brother. Holding his fist out, Izuku smiled brighter than ever, his friend doing the same in a gentle fist bump as both boys spoke in unison. Kaken, good luck. Don't f this up, Deku. And with that, Izuku followed the second person, feeling his exam card as they walked. It was made of cardboard, if he had to guess, and he read the braille that gave his name, tester number, and what group he would be in for the practical exam. Izuku couldn't afford to worry about that as he sat down in a small room, computer set in front of him. Here, he'd be able to do whatever was necessary for him to take the exam properly without disturbing others. Harsh as Kaken's studying methods were, Izuku was grateful for the memories and knowledge his friend had, on more than one occasion, beaten into him. It took longer than Izuku would have liked, but he was grateful once again for the private room and UA's open policy for those in need of accommodations, even if having someone to get him to. The next question was kind of embarrassing. He was certain he had done everything correctly and to the best of his ability as they closed the computer and lead him outside towards his practical exam group, which was gathering onto a bus. From what Izuku could tell, he hated the diamond shoes Kaken had made him wear, wondering if Kaken would believe they'd gotten destroyed in the practical portion. Izuku knew what he'd have to do once the bus stopped at what he assumed was the practical exam, kicking the devil incarnates off of his feet as he stepped out of the bus, grateful for the extra training so he wouldn't look like a lost child when leaving vehicles on the daily, even though Kaken would still hover over the other boy's shoulders, ready to direct as needed. As he did so, he could sense someone getting closer, vision defining them more as a female figure once his feet were on the solid ground. Hey, I know you tripped on your shoelaces before, but you could just re-tie them, you know? I don't think it's very safe to run around the exam barefoot. Not to mention incredible unbecoming of a potential UA student. I must insist you put them back on this instant before the exam starts. It was the girl with the anti-gravity and some new voice coming from his left. Izuku sighed, not bothering to look at either of them or move towards the shoes. Izuku knew the best course of action would be to explain as quickly as possible without going into the specifics. It's for my quirk. I need my feet touching the ground for it to work the best. Silence. Then a small response. Oh, so that's why you tripped? I'm sorry. I see. Forgive my arrogance. Izuku knew there wasn't time for idle chat, grunting in acknowledgement, opting to run towards the front, hearing the signal for the test to begin. He could do this. This is what he and Kaken had been training and dreaming for. Through the earth, Izuku sensed the vibrations of metal machinery moving. Hesitating once, Izuku ran forwards, summoning the ground beneath them upwards, impaling a cluster of them, moving to repeat over and over and over. He knew there was a point system, but he didn't exactly want to get close enough to find out what numbers they had. Part of him wished there was more to work with than the ground and rubble around him, but he knew how dangerous it could be for him to unleash a different element with so many people around, most of whom weren't paying attention to where they were going, only caring for the obstacles in front of them. Izuku didn't blame them, but after the first few clusters he stopped in his tracks, reaching out as far as he could through the ground, trying to pinpoint a large cluster of metal parts, moving confidently as he raised the ground to impale or immobilize them. He had no idea how many points he had and he wouldn't have cared to continue on his strategy until he heard the screaming. That's the 0-pointer? Is UA crazy? Not fighting that thing. You're on your own, losers. But what made Izuku hesitate in going after easier targets was a faint cry coming from where he could sense the 0-pointer. There, hidden in a bunch of rubble, Izuku could sense someone breathing heavily. He knew what he had to do while everyone around him ran away or towards an easier target. Unknown to Izuku and the rest of the test-goers, the exam's administrators were watching their every move, commenting on various groups. It's quite a shame, isn't it? We give the children a chance to prove what heroes they are and every year, they all run away. It is quite the shame. Not so fast, Nezdu. Looks like we've got someone running at the 0-pointer. Oh, how fascinating. The Midoriya boy no less. Truly interesting. Izuku ran and knew he had to act fast if he wanted to save whoever was trapped under that rubble. Gathering his strength and steeling his nerves, Izuku built pressure in the air as he ran, releasing it when he skyrocketed upwards, sensing the robot approaching. He had an idea, and he really hoped this would be easier than bending the spoon. With every ounce of strength he possessed, he reached out with his senses and found the chooks in the robot's makeup. Metal was just another subsection of rocks after all, or at very least had enough rock left over from when it was mined and processed for this to work as he willed the hunk of metal to collapse in on itself, landing on its head, none too gracefully, the force of his quirk and the air stopping it in its tracks. Izuku slid down as fast as he could, using the air pressure he gathered to cushion himself. He willed the rubble away from the trapped person, running over to assess the damage. "Can you stand?" he asked simply, offering his hand to them. He was surprised to hear the gravity girl's voice, sounding like she was about to cry. "I think I broke something. It can't end like this. I need to get in. I can't afford to fail this exam." Izuku knew anyone else wouldn't have cared if the girl got in or not, but he wasn't exactly anyone else, and he had a plan. "Test isn't over yet, you know. Grab my shoulder, I'll help you up. We still have time." To his surprise and relief, she complied with only a hiss of pain as he simplified his plans. "I can get us to the robots, but I'm going to need you to tell me what points they are. We'll work together." The girl grunted in response, directing Izuku to the biggest clump of higher-pointed robots whereas they quickly devised a strategy. Izuku would create rubble for her to use as she wished, and she would tell him what their point values were. They split the points from the system evenly, gaining more and more points until the end of exam alarms sounded, both of them breathing heavily, the girl having hobbled away to hurl, from what Izuku could smell. The voice of an old woman cut through the tired testers. "Is anybody hurt?" Izuku spoke up, looking in the direction of the voice as his temporary partner hobbled back over to lean on his shoulder, clearly too exhausted to call out herself. Over here, ma'am. We think she might have broken something after she got stuck under some rubble with the 0-pointer. He heard a small tsk as he sensed the lady getting closer. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he gathered she had some kind of healing quirk. She spoke lightly and calmly to the both of them. "There you go, dear, and please have some gummies. Did the 0-pointer cost you your shoes by any chance, young man?" Izuku could feel his face flush with embarrassment as he was sure everyone was now looking to see him without shoes. Izuku mumbled a response, not wanting to be in anyone's attention for too long. No ma'am. I got rid of them so I could use my quirk easier." There was a small tsk as he sensed the woman leaving, muttering about how reckless and stupid he was, as well as something about risking infection. He noticed the girl was still with him, to his surprise. Thank you for saving me and helping me with the rest of the exam. I don't believe I introduced myself. I'm Achiko Uraraka." Izuku turned to face her, letting himself smile as he held out his hand in, what he hoped, was her direction. "Izuku Midoriya. And don't mention it. Being a hero isn't always about what's best for oneself, it's oftentimes about what is right, and I just felt helping you was the right thing to do. I hope we racked up enough points. You've got an amazing quirk, Uraraka, and I hope we see each other in the hero course." With that, the two walked together towards the bus, chatting idly all the way back to the main campus. As soon as Izuku stepped off the bus, he could smell Kaken nearby, bid farewell to his new friend, and ran towards his practically brother. Izuku didn't want to admit it, but his stunt with the 0-pointer had drained him like crazy, which didn't go unnoticed by Kaken. How could he not realize it when the other boy was literally falling asleep on his feet, causing Kaken to grumble and lift the smaller boy onto his back, glaring at anyone who gave them a sideways look, daring them to say something and wake Deku up. The entrance exam was over, and the wait for the both of them had begun, although back at UA, the teachers chatted about those who looked promising and All Might couldn't stop the genuine smile that graced his face as he watched a slightly older and much more assured Izuku Midoriya's practical exam. Of those testing for the hero course, Midoriya had been the only one to rush the 0-pointer for the sake of another test taker. The more and more All Might watched, the prouder he felt, and he thought that maybe, just maybe, this boy had promise far greater than All Might had seen in that alleyway 2 years ago. It took 2 nerve-wracking weeks for the UA letters to arrive at the respective Bakugu and Midoriya households, neither boy wanting to see the other until they opened the letters, opting to continue training alone, or in Izuku's case, with Aizawa. Izuku knew they just had to get in together or this would all be for nothing, and he didn't know if he was ready to accept the alternative. Even so, Izuku took a deep breath and opened the letter, feeling something circular within the package. Izuku set whatever it was down on his desk, going to reach for the paper inside when he heard the circle thing hum to life, followed by a voice Izuku knew by heart. I am here as a projection now. I know it's been a while, but with great power comes a great amount of paperwork, huh? You see, the truth is I didn't come to this city to just fight villains. You're looking at one of the newest UA faculty members. There is something I need to show you, young man. You passed the written test with flying colors, my boy. You also managed to get quite the handful of combat points in the practical exam. However, I want you to listen to something. Izuku could tell All Might went to play something within the recording, surprised to hear Uraraka's voice coming through the projection. Excuse me, I wanted to ask something about the boy with the long green hair and freckles. The one with the visor and no shoes. Is it possible to give him some of my points? He helped me when everyone else ran away, and carried me around afterwards. I just don't think it's fair for me to have those points when I didn't earn them myself. All Might spoke once again, and Izuku couldn't tell if his voice sounded kinder or had something else in it, something he'd only heard in his mother's voice when he'd accomplish what others thought impossible of him. Your actions speak volume to your character, young man. This girl was not only saved by your actions, but she was moved to act by them as well. The practical exam is not graded on combat points alone, you see. After all, what kind of a hero school would you be if it did not take into account those who save others and do the right thing? That is why we have rescue points. To test the character of those wanting to be heroes by how they would naturally act. You earned 60 rescue points, with your total of 30 combat points. You both passed, my boy. Welcome to your hero academia, young Midoriya. Izuku could feel the tears falling as the device died down, signaling the of the projection and the wait for Izuku's future. He was going to UA as a student in the hero course. There was only one thing left to do as Izuku grabbed the letter and flung open the door, knowing his mother was waiting in the living room. He ran down the hall and into the room, flinging his arms open to engulf his mother in a giant hug as he cried out with joy. I passed, Mom. I passed. Inko started to cry, seeing how happy he was, hugging him with all the more vigor. There had never been a doubt in her mind, but she knew her boy felt as though he had to prove himself. Inko smiled to herself, knowing there was a long road ahead of the both of them. You see, Inko had worked the odd jobs no one wanted for the past few years, her son's enthusiasm infecting her as she worked and studied while his son would be away training. It wasn't easy, she would admit, but Inko Midoriya had some news of her own to share with her son. Izuku, I have my own news. You know, I've been working a lot of jobs for a good while now, and during that time I went back to school to get that degree I always wanted, as well as a teaching license, and there was a position open that I applied for. I got the call while you were in your room. I'm going to UA as a teacher in the general studies course. I hope you don't mind. The news took Izuku by surprise. He had been well aware of his mother's strange hours and returning to her education, but UA was a new development. Izuku knew his mother was perfect for UA, being timid enough to be loved by anyone who got to know her, but having dealt with Kaken for long enough to handle unruly quirk using children and teenagers. He couldn't help but feel pride for his mother, as she did for him, and he made no effort to hide it as he spoke. Mom, that's amazing. Nezdu would have to be an idiot to reject your application. It's no wonder you got the job. Everything is going to be okay now, things are looking up. Inko laughed, knowing that spending time with a Bakugu was the only way Izuku would ever have the courage to call anyone an idiot. And speaking of, Inko heard the doorbell ring and Mitsuki's muffled voice from outside. Inko rushed to let them in, eager to finally share the news to everyone. Mitsuki, upon hearing of Izuku's acceptance and Inko's new job, ran forward and lifted both Midoriyas off of the ground in a vice-like hug. Kakin tried to hid a small smile on his face as he punched Izuku's shoulder affectionately, having also passed. Not bad, Deku. Besides, UA would have to be a bunch of idiots to reject Auntie. She'll show those general study sheets who's boss. The swearing did not escape Inko, who thoroughly chewed the young Bakugo out while Izuku tried to muffle his laughter. It didn't work, the boys beginning to roughhouse in the living room, only separated when the pair of mothers began to scold them. The boys excused themselves to Izuku's room, wanting to compare projections and read the actual letters provided, leaving the two mothers alone. Inko smiled as Mitsuki poured the both of them some tea, talking quietly to not risk the boys overhearing. I'm so happy, Suki. It's like, for the first time since since his attack, everything is looking up. Izuku's smiling more and more, and I can't see him anymore when I close my eyes. All I see is our boys, Suki, and I'm just really happy. Mitsuki smiled, reaching out for her friend's hand. It hadn't been easy for Inko to get that degree, and Mitsuki may and or may not have pressured some old acquaintances to help her out when bills would be due, leaving Inko to find just enough in her account to do what was needed. Mitsuki had watched their boys grow stronger and closer, and it didn't escape her that Inko had grown too. No longer was she the timid, sensitive woman of her marriage. Now she was a wonderful, beautiful, strong and clever mother and teacher. Inko, I fear our boys aren't boys anymore. We've done the best we can with them, and they're fine young men with the ball and hearts to become great heroes. After the obligatory celebration for both boys and Inko, the two families set to work on the paperwork, Inko promising to hand them in when she went to set her classroom in order. Once the paperwork was out of the way, Inko insisted on bringing Izuku to campus grounds early so he could get a lay of the land, know the buildings and how to navigate as well as meet a few teachers early, at Nezu's insistence. Once Izuku was on campus and in Nezu's office, the two adults would discuss accommodations as a parent to administration. Inko, glad the principal seemed to understand and was willing to listen and learn more about Izuku's license to use his quirk, surprised it was for simply navigation and nothing more. Izuku couldn't care less about the building's layouts when all he wanted to do was talk and learn about the quirks of his teachers. After all, he had no idea when he would have the chance to grill them once classes started, if at all. The teachers and faculty seemed amused at the boy's enthusiasm, answering whatever questions they could. If the boy was this excited about quirks, they wondered what he'd be like once classes started. Inko was happy and unsurprised to learn the letter of recommendation that landed her job had come from Aizawa of all people, silently noting to bring him some food as a thanks. Inko noticed a lot about her coworker had changed since she last saw him face to face, having trusted Izuku and the hero himself to look after her boy. Firstly, she noticed how tired he looked now, bags under the young man's eyes, and how he would stare blankly ahead, only focusing if he was addressed directly. Secondly, she didn't fail to see the pain that blank look hid, especially the guilt she saw in his eyes when he looked towards her, though she couldn't think of why for the life of her. Inko was unsettled to say the least, but she couldn't let it affect her and get in the way of teaching. Inko knew she wouldn't be able to hold a candle to her coworkers once the students arrived, knowing their status as heroes far outshine her, but Inko was determined to do her best for the sake of the students. Inko worked late into the nights in the weeks leading up to the semester's start to ensure everything, from the room's presentation to her lesson plans, were absolutely perfect and had Nezu's sign of approval. And finally, the first day was there and both Midoriyas were nervously excited, while the young Bakugo refused to say, preferring to keep an eye on the two as they walked from the train station to the school. It was early in the morning. Still, but Inko had insisted they all arrive on the first day together and early enough for Inko to ready her materials. Izuku himself wasn't exactly awake, wearily leaning on whatever wall or door frame was nearest to him, and the young Bakugo was hungry, muttering about how no one was awake to make anything. Parting ways in the main building's first hallway, the boys bid their adult goodbye and went in search of their schedules, Katsuki reading them aloud, noting with satisfaction that they were both in the 1A homeroom. If Deku had been in a different class, he would make the school pay for damages until they fixed it, and that would taint his record. Walking through the halls, the boys managed to find the classroom in question after running into Recovery Girl, who was on her way to her office and was more than willing to point the boys in the correct direction, giving a small frown and a quiet tsk when noting that the green-haired boy, once again, had no shoes on. Once in the classroom, they asserted their places next to each other, quietly chatting and keeping to themselves, despite the fact Izuku could feel another person in the room, hiding under the desk. Normally, he would have freaked out, but he knew Aizawa had this habit of falling asleep in the strangest of places, even going as far as to carry a sleeping bag with him. Izuku would admit he understood how Aizawa could sleep in just the bag. It was comfortable as all get out and smelled faintly of cats and firewood. It was another 10 minutes before the door opened, signaling their next classmate's arrival. Izuku could sense the newcomer stiffen, their posture becoming more rigid and their sharp intake of air, and Izuku could smell something coming from them that was vaguely familiar, though it was too early to tell what exactly. It wasn't until the newcomer spoke that Izuku recognized them as the rule stickler in the practical exam. I see I was not the only one to take attendance seriously. My name is Tenya Ida. I believe I met one of you at the entrance exam. Izuku turned in the direction of the boy Ida, and smiled kindly. He hoped it looked kind, while he could sense Kaken's look of disinterest, not from any quirk. The two boys had grown up together, and Izuku would have to be an idiot to not know how Kaken would react. Pleased to properly meet you, Ida. Name's Izuku Midoriya, and that grumpy Gus is Katsuki Bakubu. Don't let him intimidate you, he'll use it later on if you do. His introduction earned a yell of indignation from Kaken, saying something about being able to introduce himself, causing Izuku to laugh, throwing out a half-hearted response. Slowly but surely, the classroom began to fill up and Izuku was having trouble keeping track of what everyone was doing, their voices overlapping and the smells from their quirks were mixing together, making it difficult to keep tabs on what quirks he thought they had. Izuku was lost in thought and was trying to keep all the movement and voices and introductions in order with little success. If Izuku kept this up, he knew it would be a long school year. An all too familiar voice cut through the chatter as Aizawa stood, shedding the sleeping bag, clearly startling pretty much everyone in class, save for Izuku. Aizawa hadn't expected the brats he was saddled with to be much of anything, resigning them to be what they always gave him. A bunch of snobbish kids who would think they could do anything they wanted and deserved to be a hero because they passed one exam and had a strong quirk. Looking at this class before him, he could spot at least 3 students he just knew would be his problem children of the year, if they survived or lasted that long. Even still, Aizawa had promised he would give them a chance to show potential before he started expelling, which he probably would have done if Nezda hadn't made the expulsion requirements more rigid and tricky. And with that in mind, he walked to the door, opening it and calling to the students, not bothering to turn around. Get changed into your gym cloths and then follow me, we're doing quirk assessments. Don't worry about the syllabus and orientation crap, just do as you're told. After changing, the whole of 1A followed their teacher to the P to E field, many confused and muttering amongst themselves, some about the assessment and others about the identity of their teacher. Izuku kept to the back of the small crowd, hovering near Kaken and keeping silent. He had the strangest feeling that some of his classmates were looking at him, their silent judgment feeling daggers in his chest. Izuku knew they had reason to be wary of him, the quiet kid with no shoes, no apparent quirk and the darkest visor-like glasses and an obvious and deep connection to the loud, arrogant ashen blonde who seemed glued to his side as they walked. Himself was glaring daggers as they walked, noticing the quizzical and judgmental looks that he noticed coming from a small, purple, what even was that on his head? Lining up on the field, the class waited for instructions. Izuku could feel many of them shuffling with unease as Aizawa spoke, deadpan and direct. Listen up. This assessment will have 5 parts, a 50-meter dash, grip strength test, a standing long jump, sustained sideways jump and a ball pitch. Use your quirks or else this is pointless and you'll get detention for wasting my time. Got it? The class responded positively, seeming excited that their quirks would be allowed and encouraged, their exclamations overlapping each other, to which Izuku could only catch few snippets of. Oh man, this is actually gonna be fun. Oh, thank goodness, I'd die if I couldn't use my quirk. I wonder how everyone will use theirs. I see what sensei means. If we cannot use our quirks to better ourselves here, how can we use them in combat? Izuku said nothing, observing his classmates now that they were spread out, isolating their vibrations to investigate the individuals as he waited. He knew Aizawa better than the rest of his class, and he knew there was something their teacher wasn't telling them, as usual. Izuku swore that man could be hit with a truthfulness quirk and he'd still find ways to hide any information he wanted. The class chatter died when a voice spoke above everyone else, cutting them off and churning Izuku's stomach at the words. "Sensei, why doesn't that green-haired kid have any shoes on? Aren't you gonna do something about it?" Izuku's face burned with anger and embarrassment, wanting nothing more than to run and hide, knowing everyone was now staring at his bare feet. The direction of the voice and the vibrations in the air caused by the words directed the speaker to be a small figure Izuku had noticed standing unusually and weirdly close to a few of what Izuku could gather, female classmates. What surprised Izuku, however, were the responses that followed before Kaken could murder whomever spoke. "Dude, that was seriously uncalled for. That's totally unmanly. You can't just say that kind of thing. The choice of footwear, or lack thereof, of our classmate is unimportant and irrelevant to the task at hand. While I did notice the lack of footwear, I find pointing it out detrimental, distracting, and especially unbecoming of anyone. You are a UA student now, and so you must act like one. Ask something like that again and you're dead, great freak." Izuku expected nothing less from Kaken. The outcry of indignation and scorn towards the speaker took Izuku by surprise. They had defended him? But it was only the first day of class. They shouldn't feel any kind of connection to him, let alone the need to defend him. He was pulled from his thoughts at Aizawa's voice, cutting off all of the class, and if he didn't know any better, he would think Aizawa was angry. "Mineta, ask anything like that again about Midoriya and I won't stop Bakugo from doing whatever the hell he wants. Midoriya's choices in footwear are none of your concern, and if he felt like bringing up his reasons, he would have done so. No more stupid questions or chit-chat and get to work." Aizawa was, in fact, angry at the small boy. Not only could he tell the boy would be an issue around his female students, mentally noting his unfavorable behavior towards them, but he just knew the boy had no potential. Sure, the kid might be able to finagle success by creatively maneuvering or perhaps apprehending any opponent, but Aizawa just knew the boy would be too distracted to come up with anything half-decent. Not that he would admit it, but targeting the problem child just because his feet were not in shoes was a low blow that really set Aizawa off. This was the hero course, surely it wouldn't be much of a stretch to assume it was quirk-related. Although he was determined to keep his personal connection to the problem child under wraps and remain unbiased towards his teaching, part of Aizawa knew Midoriya had far more potential than any of the student before him, not only as a hero but as a role model, and Aizawa hoped he would become the man the boy's father never was. After the outburst, the tests began and ended in quick succession, testing the students one after the other, note after note. Aizawa was almost having fun with this, if it wasn't for that Diamond Mineta kid who passed half of the tests by attaching himself to other kids, noting that he attached to the girls more often. Aizawa had a sinking feeling about that boy, knowing that since he technically passed the tests, he was unable to expel the brat, yet. Unsurprisingly to Aizawa, Problem Child was sticking to 3 of his 4 elements in the dash and both jump assessments, while only doing moderately well on the strength assessment. The kid had been training for speed and precision over strength after all, and he showed great potential, as well as a deep-seated respect for Aizawa that the man had ingrained into his skull after many, many training sessions. Now it was time for the ball throw, and the only one to fail miserably was Mineta, even if he did just barely pass the overall assessment, although Aizawa wondered if he could make a case to Nezudo about cheating. As it turned out, Aizawa wouldn't need to fight with the principal to expel the potential-less boy after hearing screams coming from the girls' locker rooms, running as fast as he could. "Girls? Girls, is everyone okay? Is it safe for me to come in?" There was a moment of dead silence before Aizawa heard responses, a pit forming in his stomach. It was only the first day and he couldn't afford for anything to happen to the brats, especially since most of the girls showed promise, while the rest just needed a little more time. "You can come in, Sensei. Could you please get him away from us?" Ribbit. He opened the door furiously, capture gear at the ready for whoever was after his students, taking in the room before him. Several of the girls had their coats on to cover themselves, while the others were either fully clothed in uniform or still in their gym cloths, several purple ball plastered to their cloths, and the purple-haired boy himself was on the other side of the room, completely encased in a stone prison. The girls otherwise looked okay, shocked at best, and Mineta himself looked terrified. Aizawa signed, gathering a hypothesis of what happened, calling out through the thin walls to the boy who he knew trapped the little perv. "You can let him out now, Midoriya. I'll take care of it. Everyone back to the class and study until the bell, then get to your next class. Minteta and I will have a little chat with Principal Nezdu." The stone returned to the ground and the capture gear soon replaced it, dragging the boy along with a very, very angry Aizawa and a confused class left behind them. Once back in the classroom, Izuku went towards the group of girls, knowing he owed them an apology and explanation. "I'm sorry if I scared any of you. I lost track of him while I was changing, and the next thing, I knew he was in the vents and in your room. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him in there before he reached you. Are you all okay?" The girls were surprised that the boy was offering an apology for saving them. Looking to one another and nodding in unison, they mentally vowed to protect the boy in front of them as thanks and to repay his kindness. Momo speaking gently. "Midoriya, you got him, didn't you? Ifs and buts are irrelevant. You acted when we were too shocked to. We reject your apology and instead offer our thanks." The girls nodded enthusiastically, chiming in to the thanks, which just confused Izuku more. Shouldn't they be mad he didn't act sooner? "Hey, I don't want to sound rude or offensive, but how did you know he was in the vents? Or how to catch him?" Uraraka regretted the question when she saw the scary-looking ash-blonde boy glaring at her, as well as the look of embarrassment that crossed the face of the boy in front of her. "Oh, it's my quirk. Well, a part of it anyways. I can sense vibrations through the ground, which allows me to be aware of unseen surroundings, which is why I don't have shoes. It shows me the best picture if my feet are touching the ground." Uraraka didn't expect that answer, but it made sense, given how he had directed them towards the robots several streets over in the entrance exam. She didn't expect the rest of the class to be listening in and contributing thoughts about his quirk, and she could have sworn the boy was holding back tears behind that visor at their words. "So, you can see things that might be hidden? That's so cool. All I can do is shock things, and even then, I might fry my brain if I'm not careful. That's part of your quirk and you used it to help the girls? That's so effing manly. It seems I once again underestimated you, Midoriya. Truly you are a worthy student of UA." Izuku, hearing these words coming from all sides, had never felt happier as the bell rang to signal the transition to their next class. Inko was having a wonderful first day, all of her students surprised to see such a normal-looking woman as their teacher but happy that she seemed to know what she was talking about. They asked more about Inko herself than the class, but she didn't mind one bit, answering their questions happily, hoping being open to them would gain their respect. Sure, there were the unruly few who would rather use their quirks to do whatever they wanted than listen to someone like Inko. And then there was Hitoshi Shinso, a boy who sat in the back of her class, silent as a mouse. The boy looked tired and uninterested to Inko, and she couldn't help but feel like something was off about the way some of the students seemed to avoid him. In a way, he reminded her of Izuku, just after the aquarium incident, alone, scared and almost utterly hopeless, save for a small glimmer of hope in his eyes. When she asked the class some simple icebreakers, he responded shortly before returning to his shell. Inko's motherly instincts were going haywire, and while it was only the first day, she wanted to learn more about the boy and save him, as Aizawa had saved Izuku, though she doubted the man knew how much he had actually done for Izuku, or how highly the boy regarded the man. It was lunchtime now, and Inko had a few papers she needed to give Nezdu before lunch got out, and she'd be confined to her desk for the rest of the day. Knocking gently, she entered the principal's office after hearing an affirmative call. Inko entered the room to see Aizawa holding a very distressed young man, looking angrier than Mitsuki after the press wouldn't stop badgering their boys. "Sorry to interrupt, I have those papers you wanted, Nezdu." The mouse-bear creature smiled at the welcome distraction. Aizawa was trying to convince him to alert the authorities on the boy before them, and while Nezdu knew it was a reasonable course of action, He didn't want to deal with angry parents on the first day of school again. But Inko was both a teacher and a parent, and Nezdu was certain she could provide insight neither hero nor principal would be able to have. Thank you, Inko, my dear. I'm afraid Aizawa and I are at a disagreement on how to proceed with young Mineta here. Perhaps you would have some input. The invite surprised both Aizawa and Inko, but neither argued with the principal. I would certainly love to help how I can, sir. What is it that this young man did to earn himself a place in the office on the first day, if I may ask? Before either adult could respond, the boy spoke up with his voice full of anger and spite. I was just having some fun, it's not a big deal. The girls were fine, nothing happened, and how could I not mess around? If that green-haired, shoeless freak hadn't made a big deal out of it, none of this would matter. At those words, Inko's heart went cold and all those in the room could sense it, and it was at that moment that Nezdu learned what the wrath of a mother was, and that terrified him. I see. I personally would consider legal action, but as my son was not one of the direct victims, it is not up to me, and I would suggest notifying the girl's parents so that they could decide how they want to proceed. Suspension at the least, expulsion at most if you feel this would repeat far beyond your control and don't want to answer as to why the school couldn't protect their daughters. Aizawa was surprised that Inko of all people would suggest expulsion, but he wasn't exactly one to talk, and what she said made sense. Nezdu seemed to agree, nodding thoughtfully as Inko spoke once again, this time directly to the boy who was now cowering in fear. As for you, young man, no matter the punishment they decide, if you ever refer to my son in that manner again, I will ensure you regret it. Inko knew she was speaking as a mother rather than the teacher she needed to be, but she didn't care. Izuka had been through too much to be called anything by this boy with an unsavory attitude and couldn't even hold to his own against someone like Inko. Nezdu hummed cheerily, having either not heard or chosen to ignore Inko's outburst towards the boy, hopping down from his chair. Thank you for your wonderful insight, my dear. I fear 1A will lose a classmate, but the space will most certainly be filled easily. Perhaps now is the year to test that theory of yours, my friend. Aizawa nodded quietly, and Inko knew he was hiding a smile. She didn't know what theory they were referring to, but that wasn't really her place, was it? Inko was happy she could help, excusing herself to eat before lunch was over, running to her classroom afterwards, mentally noting to make some of Izuku's favorite foods for tonight as a silent reward for doing the right thing. The school hadn't even ended before the word of Mineta's expulsion spread through the entirety of UA and how a fellow classmate had stopped the boy from doing anything to their female peers. Aizawa himself hated the gossip, but it did give him a chance to stir up those who might have slipped through the entrance exam's radar. The students who were smart enough for the school, but didn't have the physical quirks tested in the exam. He made it so that any student serious about becoming a hero could potentially move up to his class, provided they proved themselves in the sports festival. As happy as he was that Nezdu was allowing him this, he wanted whatever kid he'd end up with had enough time to train themselves to be on par with what his students now should be by then. All Might had heard the gossip of the expulsion, none too happy something like that had taken place on UA grounds, but happy it was dealt with properly. Only the teachers knew the full story and the identity of the student who helped those girls, and after All Might learned that it was, as he suspected, young Midoriya, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the one he had been searching for. It was only the first day, of course, but All Might felt a stronger and stronger pull towards the boy, as if all those who had wielded All for One were pulling them closer, telling him that he was what he was at UA searching for. He knew he would have to keep an open mind, but he also wanted to keep an eye on the young Midoriya boy. He certainly had the physicality to wield it properly, and he had a good quirk and an even better heart to guide him. The boy was certainly a shining candidate, but only time would tell. He had to be sure the boy was the one. Izuka didn't know how he survived the first day at UA, but he was glad he was surviving it with Kaken, knowing he wouldn't have the guts to speak out as much as he did without the explosive boy at his side. Izuku was grateful for many things at UA, and he was glad the first day had consisted of only course overviews and introductions, save for Aizawa's class, which didn't surprise him one bit. But today was the first day of their class with All Might himself, and to say the class was nervous was a severe understatement. Izuku could hear his classmates talking amongst themselves, speculating on how the number one hero would react to the class. Izuku was nervous for a reason, very different reason however. Sure, having the top hero teaching you was nerve-wracking, but Izuku couldn't help but wonder if All Might remembered him. It was a stretch he knew, it had been 2 years and they'd only met face to face once, but he just had this feeling that wouldn't go away, wondering if he would like Izuku once he got to know him as a student. The young Bakugo noticed how tense his friend was getting as he sat in silence, and the rest of the class was noticing as well, no longer particularly caring about the boy's lack of shoes when he had watched half of their backs without a second thought. The class did notice, however, the other boy who seemed glued to his hip walk over and lightly tapped the boy on the head before speaking. "You're tensing up, Deku. Knock it off, you know that ticks me off." The class stood aghast at the boy's harsh words before becoming even more confused at the other's nonchalant and kind response. "Oh, thanks, Kaken." They didn't have time to question them when the door at the back of the classroom slammed open, All Might rushing into the room, meeting many starry-eyed students, exclaiming proudly to the world, "I am here entering through the back door, huh?" Izuku couldn't help but wince at the sudden loud noise and multiple vibrations that overpowered his senses temporarily, which didn't escape All Might and Kaken's notice. All Might made that a mental note as he addressed the class, much quieter this time, telling them to gather their hero costumes and meet him outside. They were going to ground beta for team simulations, explaining they would be in groups of 4 with one group of 5, 2 acting as heroes and the other 2 acting as villains, the goal to either capture the other team or the villain's weapon they would hide within a building. To Izuku's dismay, the groups were to be picked at random, meaning he might have to fight with someone who didn't know the full capability of his quirk and even fight against the only person who did know. As for the present, however, he was having trouble with his hero costume, confused as to what the final piece was exactly. He felt the materials, acknowledging it was for some kind of support, but ultra-thin and flexible. His confusion was solved when he felt Kaken come over, grabbing the articles and shoving them on his feet, realizing there were, in fact, some form of footwear, durable enough to protect his feet, but the soles having 2 holes in them so the bridges of his feet were protected, but the rest of his feet were still unobscured. "They're shoes, dumbass, and don't you dare get rid of these, or I'll have the old hag hunt you down, Deku." Kaken may have been growling, but Izuku could sense the gentleness behind the facade. Kaken had a kind heart at his core and just had a little trouble expressing his emotions the way everyone else would have. It's part of what made the two such an unstoppable team in Izuku's opinion. The hard-headed and brash nature of Kaken's would serve him well in a fight, focused on the goal of winning and defeating anything that was a threat, while Izuku's quieter and gentle nature would be there to comfort anyone in need, connecting with their emotions and helping them through it all in times of crisis. The two would be an unstoppable team, if they were on the same team, that is. Izuku was paired with Uraraka instead, while Kaken was with both Ida and Hakigure, a girl whose quirk Izuku had yet to figure out, getting nothing out of the ordinary from her vibrations or anything from the air around her, as many quirks seemed to react. Izuku and Uraraka would act as the heroes, and the others as the villains. Izuku was secretly glad he wasn't on the villain team. He didn't think he'd be able to handle the memories it would undoubtedly bring up, before All Might let Kaken's team lose first in order to prepare how they saw fit, which gave Izuku time to talk strategy with Uraraka, taking her to an empty hallway so they could talk without distraction. "So, what do you think? Got any plans on how to win this thing, Deku?" Izuku winced at hearing the name Deku from someone other than Kaken before explaining what his thoughts were on the situation at hand. "I have some ideas. Kaken's fighting style is to be aggressive and overpower his enemy. Knowing him, he'll probably come straight for me, which is really bad, because he knows my fighting style as much as I know his. Ida will probably be left to guard the weapon. I might be able to counter Hakigure if I knew what her quirk was and what Kaken might do based on that." Uraraka was following along intently, only faltering when he mentioned their third opponent. "Figure out her quirk? It's pretty obvious, though. Not to be rude, but she's invisible, Deku. It's actually really obvious when you look at her." At those words, she saw her partner stiffen and she could tell he was upset. Why was he upset? What did she do? Bakugo was going to kill her if he found out she upset Deku. Invisible, of course she is. "Sorry, Uraraka, I must sound like an idiot to you. No, no, no. It's okay. I guess you just weren't paying attention through all that hair and those glasses things. I'm sorry for sounding rude, please don't be upset. Before Izuku could respond, the alarm sounded, signaling the session start. Izuku couldn't afford to lose this, more determined than ever to win. We should stick close to each other and keep our conversations to a minimum. I should be able to tell where everyone is once we get inside and we'll go from there. The two entered the building and after walking down a hallway, Izuku stopped his partner, signaling for her to keep watch so he could concentrate on the surroundings. Taking a deep breath, Izuku let his power expand upwards, sensing a large mass in a room towards the top of the building with a lone figure guarding it, a smaller figure walking around 2 floors above them and the all too familiar vibrations of his best friend in the middle of the 2 others, walking on a patrol. Izuku knew they'd have to either take all of them out individually or rush in guns blazing, which was stupid and detrimental, as there would be 2 opponents ready to attack from behind. Waving Uraraka over, he quietly explained his plan, sensing her approval, since he couldn't exactly see her nodding, as they moved along. Once they got to the floor with the first villain, Izuku shifted his foot quietly as the ground around them moved with his will, encasing them in stone as they ran forward silently, and he lowered a wall to tape their arm, effectively capturing them. Hakigure was surprised and only slightly pleased that the Midoriya kid had known exactly where she was, pinpointing her location and her arm, which was the strangest part of it all. She'd removed everything that made her visible, so how had he seen her? Continuing on, Izuku grabbed Uraraka, knowing Kaken was getting closer. As quietly as he could, he molded the next few layers to have a hole big enough for her to get through as she made herself weightless, sending her in the right direction with a quick gust of wind before closing the holes behind her, not wanting Kaken to see the evidence of their plan. And as Uraraka made her way to where Ida and the weapon were, Izuku confronted Kaken head-on, a move the Bakugu thought was pretty ballsy coming from Deku of all people. But the two knew each other like they knew themselves, leaving the two in heated combat that both knew would have no clear winner as their classmates watched on in silent awe. All Might himself watched the boys intently, seeing how the boys recognized each other as equals and how there couldn't be a winner in this fight, the two knowing each other's fighting style too well for either to gain the upper hand. While the two fought below, Uraraka snuck some loose stones she could find on the ground from previous fights into her pockets to use as improvised projectiles. As she neared a doorway, she could hear Ida rambling about something, trying to get into the mindset of a villain, which would have been funny if this wasn't so important. Taking a pebble, she tossed it to the other side of the room as soon as the boy's back was turned. He stopped what he was doing and turned towards the source of the sound, walking across the room, proclaiming loudly, "I know you're their hero. You will never foil our genius, evil, villainous plan." Uraraka sped over to the weapon and placed her hand on it as the testing alarm sounded the end of the session, saying casually to the confused and honestly slightly betrayed boy in front of her, "Actually, we did." The heroes had won, and All Might couldn't stop laughing. After freeing Hakigure and leaving the training ground, the 5 students walked side by side to the control room where the rest of the class waited with All Might, all of them smiling as they entered the room. Izuku couldn't see the awe his classmates' faces held, but he did notice a few of them were bouncing on the ball of their feet in excitement, at least, he was pretty sure that indicated excitement, before All Might's booming voice caught everyone's attention. "Well done all of you. Truly, we witnessed a sight to behold. Now, can anyone tell the class what might have been the villain's downfall?" There was a beat of silence before Yaoyorozu spoke, exhibiting her analytical side for all the class to see. The villains sent Hakigure to patrol by herself. While that would have been a good strategy, the villains failed to take Midoriya's quirk into account that negates the effectiveness of her quirk. Furthermore, they failed to take Uraraka's quirk into account as a form of fast transportation when paired with Midoriya. From what we saw, the best prepared villain was Ida, having cleared the room he was guarding as he was the only one to take Uraraka's potential quirk usage into account. There were mutterings of understanding at her explanation, which Izuku was just glad they were only seeing the positives of their strategy as All Might spoke one again. "Correct, my girl. However, you failed to explain Midoriya's reasoning behind confronting Bakugo, knowing it was a battle neither one of them would win, to give his partner time free from his second opponent. Uraraka took her opponent's transition into a villain's mindset and used it to her advantage with misdirecting his attention. Are there any other questions before we continue? The students all spoke together, Izuku once again only catching snippets of their words. Nah, I think I get it. That was so cool, Midoriya. And splitting up wasn't a bad idea, Bakugo, if Midoriya hadn't seen right through it. Bakugo and Midoriya are pretty much glued together, so seeing them fight was really unnerving, but insightful. The next group went to set up after All Might, somehow, managed to regain control over the borderline unruly class, and Izuku sat off to the side, with no sound coming though the monitors for him to listen to. Uraraka couldn't help but feel like something was off with him, still unsure on how he could possibly miss Hakigyur's quirk. She knew she might regret her next actions, but she couldn't sit around idly as she walked over to where the boy sat and lowered her voice to a whisper, not wanting to risk his anger or embarrassment at her question. Hey Deku, why didn't you notice Hakigyur's quirk? It's really obvious when you see her. Are you okay? Izuku knew he'd have to tell the class eventually, since he was unsure of how he'd be able to keep his condition a secret in the long run, and he might as well start with Uraraka, who was too close to the truth. Izuku took a deep breath, knowing her eyes were on him as he spoke, barely whispering the words he hated to say to anyone. I'm blind, Uraraka. Hakigyur's quirk is obvious if you can see it, which I can't. Uraraka nodded quietly, having suspected as much, but not wanting to risk upsetting him by bringing it up, but knowing she couldn't just avoid it. Unfortunately for the two of them, everyone had heard and All Might wondered if he'd have to hold Bakugo back, as the young man looked like he was ready to kill the poor girl for asking such questions. Midoriya stiffened, having realized the room was silent and sensing everyone looking at him. The tension broke when Bakugo spoke in true Katsuki fashion. If Deku wanted to tell you little sheets, that's his business. But don't you dare try to cheat on him because he can't see, or I'll kill you. Deku's got more guts than anyone in this room, got it? Izuku laughed at the proclamation. Sure, death threats were a norm for Kaken, but the cries of indignation that followed gave Izuku reason to laugh as his friend shouted continuously. A voice drew Izuku out of his thoughts as he focused on the individual. Half of the air around them was cooler than the surrounding air, and the other half felt hotter, Izuku guessing they had some kind of temperature quirk or elemental quirk, like Izuku himself. So, you can't see. I presume you use your quirk to navigate as you did to locate Hakigyur, correct? The voice sounded like it belonged to another boy and was unusually quiet and reserved. Izuku nodded quietly, trying to not die of embarrassment from everything. If the boy noticed, he didn't say, silently resigning himself to quietly observe the green-haired boy more closely than before. Once all of the sessions were done, the class returned to the classroom to change and gather their things for their next classes. All Might watch them leave as Aizawa rounded the corner to grill the new teacher on how the students performed. He seemed unimpressed with All Might's recollections of the students' matchups, only raising an eyebrow at the news of Bakugo and Midoriya going against each other, unsure if he'd heard that correctly. Aizawa couldn't help but wonder if the problem child would be willing to be more open now that the cat was out of the bag, knowing word of his blindness would undoubtedly spread through the school as fast as Mineta's expulsion had. Even so, Aizawa resigned himself to keeping tabs on everything that was unfolding before him in his class, slightly grateful that he would most likely no longer be badgered with questions about Midoriya's accommodations in the classroom. At the end of the school day, Inko would notice how quiet Izuku was, unable to get a response from the boy when she asked if anything was wrong, only seeing a slight smile. Katsuki was much more insightful, in his own typical way of course. Class knows Deku. Can't see sheet. Surprised him that they didn't care, like I said they would, you idiot. Izuku only hummed in response, thinking about that boy who was both hot and cold. Something about him seemed off to Izuku, but not in a bad way like Mineta had seemed. Izuku couldn't help but feel as if there was something else about the boy. Something hidden that none of those around them could sense, seeing only what they wanted or thought they would see. Izuku had a deep-seated urge to help that boy, unsure as to why or what even for, but the voice of Todoroki Shoto replayed in his mind over and over until Izuku was certain the boy was still beside him, asking about his blindness. Izuku was running blindly down an empty hallway that seemed to never end. No matter how far or how fast he thought he was, it wasn't enough. Whatever entity that he knew was chasing him was getting closer and closer as he felt the walls of the hallway closing in. He had no idea where he was or where he was going, no matter how hard he tried to use his quirk, desperately reaching out for something, anything to tell him what was going on. From somewhere behind him, he could hear cold laughter, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of his fear. Izuku felt like a child again, lost, alone and scared he was going to die as that man drew ever closer. Izuku could feel his presence right behind him, the fire from within him bursting forth in fear, threatening to engulf and consume the boy, knowing he was laughing again at the boy's agony as he spoke, his voice seeming to wrap around Izuku and chaining them together. Let your fire free, Izuku. Feel the rage within and let it consume your very being. Prove them right and take your place as my son, boy. The flames were everywhere now. Izuku could feel himself burning up from the intensity, crying aloud as he heard the distant calls of those he cared about, their pleas for help flooding his every sense, knowing he could never reach them in time. Deku? Deku, where are you? Can you wake up, you blind bastard? Izuku gasped for air as Kaken shook the boy awake, forgetting momentarily where he was and what was happening before it came back to him. He had stayed with the Bakugas, his mother insisting she stay late to work on some classwork and faculty meetings. As he came to his senses, slowly but surely waking up to the point of coherentness, he could smell some smoke, feeling the singed bedsheets underneath him with a grimace. How bad was it? The question was simple on the surface, but the young Bakugu knew the depth of what Deku had been through and the guilt he would undoubtedly feel at the question's answer. You burned your shirt half off and singed the bed. It looked pretty bad on my end, not gonna lie. It's been ages since a dream was bad enough for two parts at the same time. Nothing major, don't worry, just some tremors that woke me up. I'm pretty sure the dumbass neighbors aren't gonna be too happy with being woken up again. But that's their problem. The green-haired boy hummed in response, blankly looking into his own oblivion. Kaken studied the boy carefully, wanting to be sure his friend was ready to talk about what he had just experienced, knowing from past mistakes that forcing it out of him would only result in further shutdown, the worst case having lasted for a solid 2 weeks before he'd cracked a joke and returning to their normality. With a shaky breath, the boy spoke aloud, not to Kaken directly, but knowing that the other boy was listening intently. I was running in a hallway. I couldn't see or sense anything and he was there. Of course, he always is, but this time it wasn't his fire that hurt me. I was so scared, Kaken. He was hunting me down and I couldn't tell where he was and I was just so scared that he would find me again. I lost control and the fire just happened. It burned and he was just laughing. I could hear you and Auntie and Mom and I was just useless. I couldn't find any of you or sense you and I was so alone. He wants me to be like him, Kaken. I can't do this. I can't live as his son. What if I lose control and hurt someone? What if I end up being just like him? Izuku was rambling now, tears streaming down his scarred face as his friend watched for a moment before putting his arm around the smaller boy, hiding the tears in a side hug. He hated when Deku got like this, knowing any words of comfort and reassurance would fall to deaf ears as the boy was too engulfed in his fear to acknowledge or accept anything that could be said. If he was being honest, this was the worst attack Kaken had seen in years, wondering if the events of the previous days had something to do with it, internally growling at himself that he let those DMN reporters corner Deku, wanting some snippet of information on All Might's teaching, which really set him off. Kaken looked to the alarm clock and sighed, knowing neither one of them would be able to go back to sleep with only an hour before they would have originally woken up. Get up and ready, Deku, we got some time to kill. I'll make breakfast before the old hag gets up. With that, the two boys set to work, readying themselves for the new day of school as Izuku cleared the bedsheets and replaced them in silence. So, it was that kind of dream. Kaken thought to himself as he opened his phone to text someone he knew would be able to handle or at the very least dissuade the reporters who were laying in wait for any hero course student unfortunate enough to fall into their grasps. Deku had another attack. I think a reporter recognizing him triggered it. Can't you get rid of those DMN reporters already? I'll see what I can do. Is the problem child okay for class? He should be fine if no one tries anything. It's a no-talk level bad. Understood. I'll see what I can do. Wait, when did I give you my personal number again? After the first attack. When you didn't know how to calm him down, dumbass. Be thankful we are not in class Bakugo. Closing the phone, Kaken set to work on breakfast, or he tried to at least. The eggs were burned and the toast was a black crisp. The air once again filled with smoke which woke a very, very grumpy Mitsuki. Taking control of the kitchen, the boys' real breakfast was served before the woman made her retreat, armed with a giant mug of coffee, mumbling something about childhood incompetence. As the boys left for school, Aizawa was on campus trying to get a hold of All Might so he could get rid of those DMN reporters. Bakugo hadn't been wrong, as a news clip of a reporter rushing Midoriya had gone semi-viral, with the reporter calling out to the boy trying to just get to class. Hey kid, what's it like to have All Might as a teach? Wait a sec, I know you. You're that kid from the sludge villain from 2 years ago, right? The one who was crying? And weren't you the kid from the Gang Orca Aquarium incident a few years back? What's it like being in the hero course after all those villain attacks? Are you happy that your rescuer All Might is teaching you? The video ended with Midoriya freezing before running off as Bakugo was heard shouting profanities off camera at the reporter. None of the teachers could get more than a few words out of Midoriya that day, deciding to let the boy's explosive friend hover over him like a hawk, glaring and threatening anyone who got too close to the boy. Not that they blamed them, Inko taking the hero course teachers aside to explain the situation around Izuku as quietly and as best she could. Most teachers wanted the reporters gone, but since they weren't technically on school grounds, Nezu wouldn't let the teachers get rid of them. It was going to be a long day, Aizawa could already tell. It took Aizawa 20 minutes to deter the reporters from blocking the school gates, having gained permission from Nezu to keep them at bay without fully removing the press from the grounds, citing potential lawsuits or some other bull crap no one really wanted to deal with. After clearing a path for the students to run through, dodging the questions Aizawa couldn't stop them from asking, he saw problem child number 1 and 2 running towards the school, the green-haired boy keeping his head down as his ashen blonde friend covered the boy's ears as they passed the reporters, growling threateningly at the reporters, some of whom backed away, recognizing the boy and his threats, before giving a curt nod to the teacher as they entered the main building. Izuku didn't speak or react to anything, blankly following Kaken's lead as he quietly wished the whole world would just disappear. As the boys walked, he could see his mother out of the corner of his eye, and he didn't miss the worried expression on her face and demeanor, no doubt knowing what happened at the Bakugo household already. Reaching the classroom, Izuku sat at his desk. Feeling numb and slightly glad today was only going to be bookwork, unsure if he could handle anything physically taxing. He only half-heartedly paid attention as everyone else filed into the classroom, rambunctious and seemingly oblivious to Izuku wallowing in his emotions, the boy sure that if they noticed, they wouldn't care. Unbeknownst to Izuku, several of his classmates had, in fact, noticed and did care, looking to Bakugo quizzically and worriedly. Their response from the boy was a quick, angry jab towards the window where the reporters were still very much in sight, which left the almost stupidly obvious connection to what was wrong. The class, after exchanging silent looks amongst themselves, vowed to keep the reporters at bay and away from Midoriya, his quiet stupor unnerving the lot of them. Inko Midoriya was absolutely furious, and every pro-hero within a 10-foot radius of the woman made it their personal mission to stay out of her way. She should have known better than to leave Izuku after that reporter brought up the incident with him. And now her baby was at school, faced wall to wall with those very same people, waiting to pounce, which was causing Inko to think of some very not nice scenarios that she was certain Mitsuki would faint over with absolute pride. Inko's sour mood did not go unnoticed by her students either, all of them unsure of what caused the sweet woman with a kind smile to scowl at her paperwork. The only person who seemed unfazed by the general education teacher's sour mood was Aizawa, too engulfed in his own sour mood to notice Inko's odd behavior, grumbling about not being able to find All Might and how his stupid PR was interfering with the students' education and mental health. The mood of Inko Midoriya did not escape Hitoshi, the lilac-haired boy watching his teacher's body language, and he couldn't help but be worried. Ever since the first day of class, Mrs. Inko had been kind to him, even after he had gotten into several almost fights, the woman breaking it up before blows could be exchanged, and learning what his quirk was, knowing she wouldn't have been the first teacher to rebuke him for the DMN thing. Hitoshi remembered her gentle eyes that seemed to look into his very soul as he felt her hand fall gently onto the boy's shoulder when he had looked away in shame, and he especially recalled when she had told something no one had ever had the heart or decency to say to the boy. Hitoshi, I don't care what others say about how they see your quirk. I may be your teacher, but I'm also a mother, and if there's one thing I know based on that, it's no one chooses their quirk, but they can choose how they use them. My ex-husband chose to use his quirk for very heinous acts, while there's someone out there with a very similar quirk that is choosing to use it for good. Those around you do not decide what your quirk is, only you can, and between you and me, I think you are far more heroic than any of those naysayers and have a very, very good chance at moving up to that empty spot, although I would miss teaching you. Hitoshi had cried that day and she had been there for him, holding him close to protect him from everything that came crashing down on him. Hitoshi wanted to be a hero more than ever, but after that conversation he knew that he now wanted, more than anything he'd ever wanted before, was to make her proud of him. And with that in mind, he couldn't help but feel like this new side of Inko was a punch in the gut from All Might himself. Hitoshi turned his attention to the coursework in front of him, determined to finish it in time to start planning. He needed to get Mrs. Inko's smile back. On the other side of campus, Aizawa returned to his class after searching fruitlessly for the number one hero and addressed the students before him, still very much in a very, very sour mood. Listen up. You need to choose class representatives. Hurry up and don't bug me when you're done. If anyone wakes me up, someone better be dying. And with that he left the students to fight amongst themselves on how they should proceed. I dunno, man. Should we go off of grades? Midoriya would be top with Bakugu as the class VP. Perhaps someone with a leadership streak would be best suited, though Midoriya is all that comes to mind. I wouldn't mind Deku being the class rep. He's got a knack for getting along with everyone. Midoriya is probably the manliest one of us here. He's got my vote. You idiots want Deku to represent the class? There's no goddamn way. The demon idiot freezes like a deer in headlights at the very idea of talking in front of a group. In the midst of the argument, an alarm started to blare, causing the students to fall silent and Aizawa to jump up from within his sleeping bag, ripping it off as he reached for the door before turning to the confused students. That's the school's security alarm. All of you out and follow the exit signs. It'll take you to safety. I'm going to find the other teachers and find the intrusion. Go now. The class did as they were told, Kaken dragging Izuku out from behind his desk and down the hall as the rest of the class followed suit, forming a barricade around the two, not wanting to let any of the crowd close in on them, the hall being jam-packed with panicking students and teacher, trying to move against the flow in vain, alike. Most of 1A managed to stick together, save for Ida, who was currently being pushed against a window as the crowd tried to move forwards. Ida, upon looking out the window, could see a stream of reporters breaking away from the main gate, which was strangely destroyed. Could a reporter have done that? As they broke from their crowd and fanned across the school grounds in every direction, cameras and microphones at the ready and on the prowl for anyone they could get their hands on. That's what this is all about? Reporters. The rest of the school doesn't know. Need to get everyone's attention. With a determined look in his eyes, Ida began to worm his way through the crowd as he formulated a plan. He had no idea if anyone would listen to him, but he had to try as he looked to his classmates, Midoriya in particular looking extra pale and sickly after what Ida could only assume was another ambush by the reporters, having seen the video from the previous day online. The video had enraged Ida, knowing any reporter with a shred of journalistic integrity never would have exhibited such disgraceful behavior, let alone post said video. Ida could still hear Tensei's remarks on the video as the topic had come up at the dinner table with their parents. While I understand All Might that is good for the news station's ratings. I don't see the reason they decided to bring up things that are almost certainly painful and traumatic memories for a kid. Especially mentioning the aquarium incident of all things. If you just look at the kid, you can tell there's something off about him by the way that other boy had reacted, so why kick a hornet's nest? Ida had wanted nothing more than to question what aquarium incident everyone had been referring to, but part of him knew that would be pressing into matters that did not concern him, knowing Midoriya would have his reasons for wanting to forget it, and Ida didn't want to cause his classmate any distress. Nonetheless, Ida knew he had to give input towards the conversation, if only to defend Midoriya. I'm not sure what anyone is talking about and I don't want to press, but I will say this. Midoriya has exhibited strategy and leadership befitting a UA student. He saw right through the entrance exam scoring system and, while he may seem odd at first glance, he's most certainly the most heroic person I've seen in our class, and those reporters should have some sense of integrity, all might or no. His parents had looked at him quizzically before smiling gently as Tensei himself beamed at his younger brother, ruffling his hair in light-hearted pride. All this played in Ida's mind as he caught sight of the classmate he was looking for, calling out over the crowd. "Uraraka, I need you to use your quirk on me. Everyone is panicking over nothing and I need to get their attention." The round-faced girl had barely heard Ida, turning to face him as the crowd tried to surge around them, reaching out for him to try and do as he asked, unsure of what his plan was exactly, but trusting him enough to follow his lead. The moment Ida was airborne, he activated his quirk and, after hitting a wall, caught the attention of everyone, a few people yelling at him for quirk usage, not that he cared at that moment. "Everyone, everything's fine. If you look out the windows, you can see it's just the press. There is no reason to panic, we're UA student and we should have the dignity to act like it." There was a pause of silence before Nezdu's voice rang throughout the school's overcom system, informing the students everything was indeed fine and they should return to their classes, knowing the authorities were on their way. Some of the teachers would be rounding up any press reporters they could find for the next half hour as the authorities arrived a good 5 minutes into the search and ensured every single member was accounted for. After they were rounded up, All Might stood outside of the UA gates where a bunch of disgruntled and a few angry reporters stood, ready to give them a statement before some began to argue that if he had come out sooner, there would have been no need of any of this ruckus. Needless to say, All Might was not happy to hear those words, turning to face the speaker directly, completely and utterly done with their incessant whining and complaining for their wrongdoings as they pinned them on others. That is where you are wrong. If you had any form of journalistic integrity or any sense of empathy, none of this would have happened. You crowd my students. You leech for answers they cannot give. You post a video you know will go viral that brings up some obviously traumatizing events of my students, and you shift the blame when you are caught in the act. I am more than willing to speak to the press freely, but I cannot condone such behavior. You are creating a hazardous environment for the children who are coming here for their education and are disregarding their humanity in several shallow, cold-hearted attempts to reach me. I may be a hero, but I am also a teacher now, and I cannot let you continue this. If I allowed this to continue while there are students suffering because of you, I wouldn't be a very good teacher or hero, would I? The reporters were speechless at All Might's words, having never heard such venom in his voice before. Later on, there would be a few who would try to twist the hero's words, but they would be shut down almost instantly, everyone with half a brain knowing his harsh words were a testament to his seriousness towards teaching and his students. But for the time being, Class 1A still needed representatives, and almost all of the class was practically begging Bakugo to agree on the statement that Midoriya was the best and only candidate for the role. Izuka had been quietly listening to the arguments, unsure as to why they wanted him of all people, but he knew there was someone far more suited to the role than he. Raising his hand, Izuku caught the attention of the class before pointing towards the smell of automotive parts and Ida before speaking in a quiet, hoarse voice. Ida handled the situation today the best. He should be the class rep. There was a moment of Ida sputtering in confusion, trying to think of any and every reason he shouldn't have the position before the class cut him off. Izuka glad he wouldn't have to say anything else on the matter. Ida is a stickler for the rules, so that'd make sense. He did figure out what was happening before anyone else. Ida's got my vote. If Deku thinks it's a good idea, then I'm sure it is. Midoriya is the best candidate in terms of our entrance exam and his record for leading in the battle trials, but if his judgment is to trust Ida, then I see no reason to doubt him. All right, I'm with Mr. Emergency Exit. Ida was at a lose for words, deciding to just let the class talk as they appointed Yaoyorozu as the secondary representative. Ida wondered if Tensei would be proud of him when Ida told him of his class trust in him. He would, and he is a proud big brother. He's going to brag about it at his agency. Hitoshi couldn't stop fidgeting as he rode the train towards UA. The reporters had been told off and warned against coming to campus the previous day, and he wouldn't have cared if he hadn't noticed Mrs. Inko's sign of relief at the news from the previous day, although he could see she still didn't have her true smile back. That was where he came in, he thought to himself as he endured the sideways glances and the raised eyebrows at the lilac-haired boy and what was in his hands. Sure, he would be getting to school 10 minutes early, if there was nothing to stop him on his way, but it was going to be worth it. Hitoshi couldn't help but smile to himself as he subconsciously sped past the crowds to campus and his homeroom teacher's room, silently glad she was there early as he saw someone leaving her room as he approached. The figure was a long, almost shaggy green-haired boy who was wearing some kind of visor inside and no shoes. Hitoshi couldn't let some shoeless kid distract him as he lightly knocked on the door before entering the room, barely containing himself. Inko hadn't expected a student to be there so early, still thinking the earliest had another 5 minutes until they usually got there, but she was pleasantly surprised to see Hitoshi looking like he was about to burst with excitement as he tried to hide something behind him, Inko seeing it immediately, but not wanting to sour the boy's mood, so she'd have to play along. Turning to face the boy directly, Inko gave a small smile as she spoke. Hitoshi, this is a pleasant surprise, although coming early doesn't mean you can start early. What brings you to class so early in the morning? Did you rush here? Did you have any breakfast? I'm sure the cafeteria might have something if you didn't. Hitoshi couldn't help but smile as the smaller woman spoke. She had said she was a mother and she was speaking like what he remembered one sounding like. He loved that feeling she seemed to just emanate and how nothing could make it falter, even a sour mood. Taking a deep breath, Hitoshi spoke, wanting to speak clearly and carefully. He didn't want to offend or upset her. I've eaten already, Mrs. Inko. I actually came early to see you before class. I noticed you were pretty upset when those reporters were on campus, so thought I wanted to make it better, so I got you these. Hitoshi felt himself die inside, his words neither careful or clear. He was sure she was going to laugh at him for blundering around as he pulled the bouquet of flowers out from behind his back, the blue daffodils being only slightly smushed from the journey to the school. Hitoshi's fear and anxiety faded when he saw a smile so big, he wondered how it was even possible. He also noticed her eyes starting to mist and he was worried he'd something wrong before she spoke, her voice full of absolute joy. Oh, they're wonderful, Hitoshi. I didn't mean to worry you over some silly reporters, but oh, they're perfect. Come on. Let's see if we can't find a vase to put them in before the rest of the class gets here. And with that, the two set out in search of a suitable container for the flowers before borrowing a vase from Nezu himself. As the two left, the principal smiled to himself, noting the flower type and the color as it was no doubt chosen specifically for Inko. He knew she had been a good candidate for teaching, sure, but it was her experience with high-stakes information, situations and her ability to cut through the shells of closed-off students in mere moments, when that would have taken any pro-hero months to do so, spurred him to hire the woman, and those flowers were the blossoms of proof that he had been correct in his assumption. Anyone could be a teacher if they tried, but Inko herself had the makings of a teacher and mentor to her charges, which Nezu knew took something more. She had been the perfect candidate and Nezu wondered how much potential that boy had and how far he was willing to go. Perhaps Aizawa would be onto something if Nezu's calculations were to be correct about the boy with the flowers. It took a week after the reporters were told off and left UA grounds for Izuku speak again with the confidence that could rival his best friends. During that time Bakugo had been tasked with keeping the other on track, Aizawa stating that no matter what, Midoriya should be able to keep on his studies if he was serious about being a hero. Their classmates had been respectful to the two, which surprised Bakugo of all people. By now there would have been at least one shithead who would have tried something funny with Deku, and he would have landed a detention as per usual. When Izuku spoke after the week was done, the whole class seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the boy having come to class as happy as he had after they had discovered his blindness and had told him they didn't care. Izuku smiled as he quietly observed the class around him. Kaken was fighting with Kirishima about something he hadn't caught the beginnings of, while Kaminari and Siro interjected periodically. Mina and the other girls were talking about some kind of show, and the rest of the class was either talking amongst themselves or silently observing the room as Izuku was. Izuku could hear the door open and sensed the familiar footsteps of Aizawa as the class fell silent in the man's presence as he spoke in a deadpan voice, which was pretty on par for the underground hero. Get your gear and meet at the front of the school. We're taking a short trip, so hurry up and get it together. Any stupid questions like where we're going will land you detention, now move it. The class did as they were told, too curious to question anything. Izuku couldn't help but wonder where they were going as he climbed into the bus after Kaken, holding onto the boy for support before finding a seat. Years of training with his quirk, and he still hated vehicles as he could only tell what was in the DMN contraption and not where they were actually going. It was about a 15-minute drive before the bus stopped, and Izuku made a beeline off of it, grateful for the solid ground beneath him as he gained his bearings once again. Following Aizawa, he sensed someone up ahead as well as some massive structures within another structure. He could faintly sense different climates and temperatures as they entered what he assumed was a training facility. The new figure he sensed spoke, bringing his attention back to what was before him, having missed a good portion of their speech, catching only the tail ends of it. Welcome to the USJ. Izuku counted himself lucky that Aizawa was there, or he'd be totally lost on what they'd have to be doing and what the purpose of the USJ visit was, Izuku making sure he listened to this time to every word spoken. Obviously we can't get to all of the areas today, so over the next week or so we'll be coming here instead of the classroom. I'm here to supervise just in case one of you brats loses control of your quirk and hurts someone around you by accident, but your main instruction here will come from 13, so pay attention and do whatever they tell you. The brats are all yours, 13. And with that, Aizawa stood to the side and followed the group from the back as 13 called for the students to follow their lead. Izuku reached out and held onto Kaken's shoulder out of pure habit as they descended the stairs towards a large open space that Izuku guessed to be the USJ's central plaza. From where they were standing, Izuku could sense 6 different subsections and a multitude of different scenarios as he and Kaken caught up with the group before retreating his vision slightly to the immediate surrounding areas so he could focus on 13 and not the distant landscapes. 13 was interesting to Izuku. He could tell that they were small, but he couldn't sense anything that he could identify them as a definitive gender, and he hadn't ever had that happen. It was perplexing, but in a way that Izuku wanted to know more without offending the hero themselves. Okay kids, today we're going to be working in the ruins zone and we'll work our way around from there tomorrow. Follow me and we can get started. Izuku followed 13 with the rest of the class, curious as to what exactly they would be doing and how 13 would direct them. Would it be like the battle trials, where they split up by pure chance and had to complete a task, or would it be completely different? His answer came when 13 had the group stop a good 20 feet from the designated zone and addressed the students. Okay everyone. Inside the ruins, there are 4 dummy civilians that are trapped inside and need to be rescued. Each dummy is in a different location within the ruins and has various amounts of hazards around them. Your task is to go in and rescue a dummy each and get them to the medic site before their heartbeat goes out. The sooner you evacuate the better, but remember to be careful. The ruins are designed to be hazardous and the wrong quirk at the wrong place will most certainly do more harm than good. We'll split you up and go in cycles. 4 to a group, with one exception of 5. Hop to it, those dummies won't save themselves. In an instant, Izuku found himself surrounded by many of his classmates, all of them wanting him in their group for reasons Izuku was pretty sure he'd never understand. Luckily for him, Kaken stepped in between the green-haired boy and the rest of them, scowling as he crossed his arms and growling defensively. Listen up, you little sheets. Deku and I are already in a group, and if anyone else joins us, it's because we want them to be. So back off. They all grumbled before backing away from the two, knowing Bakugo wasn't kidding when he warned them to back away. It hadn't been long since they'd gotten to know them a bit, but only an idiot would have stood between the two boys. Turning to his friend, Kakin growled quietly and almost gently. "What are you thinking, ya nerd?" Izuku paused before responding, quickly running through a mental list of their peers and quirks before coming to a satisfactory conclusion, relaying his plan to the other boy, who simply nodded and grunted in understanding before giving the all-clear for Izuku to call out to the two he felt best suited what they would need. "Hey Yaoyorozu. Uraraka. Wanna be in a group with me and Kakin?" The two respective girls were surprised, and after Izuku explained his reasoning a little more, they were more than willing to group together with the boys. After the groups were formed, 13 let them loose, and most of the students of 1A would have to admit that it was honestly actually kind of fun. Izuku led the charge, sensing the cracks and surfaces of the buildings as they entered, telling his teammates what places were stable enough to stand and walk on as the others followed him further and further into the ruins. It took them about 10 minutes to find their dummy half buried under some rubble. Uraraka moved to shift all of the rubble before Izuku reached out and grabbed her arm, stopping her in her tracks. "Wait, that rubble is acting as a keystone for those walls, and if you move it now, the whole thing will collapse. Yaoyorozu, do you think you can make some kind of support for the walls?" The creation girl nodded firmly before setting to work and created some steel beams to bear the walls, Kakin helping move them into place before Uraraka moved the rubble out of the way before Izuku pulled the dummy out gently, wanting to treat the exercise as seriously as real life before they turned tail and made their way outside of the ruins where the med bay and their teachers were waiting. Setting the dummy down on the stretcher, the group noticed that they were, in fact, the only group outside of the ruins. 13 seemed astounded as they spoke to the group, Aizawa watching quietly to the side. He figured the problem children's groups would be out first. Why else would they ask for an anti-gravity and creation quirk? Well done you four. You utilized your quirks and your environment to save someone. Now we'll have to wait for you classmates and see how they fare. And so, they waited, Todoroki's group coming out second with Ida's group close behind as Siro's group brought up the rear. All in all, the simulation took a little under an hour, Siro's group having gotten slightly lost and having a building Ida had unintentionally damaged fall on them. Karishma had covered them, so no one was actually hurt, and Ida swore up and down he didn't know they were there or that he'd meant to damage the building's structural integrity. Even still, all the students of 1A were more than happy with their accomplishments and eager to return the following days to test themselves further. And return they did, day after day, going from simulation to simulation. 13 would be lying if they said the Midoriya boy hadn't impressed them, seeing through whatever terrain they put him in and rescuing the civilian in record times, for a first year anyways. After class one day, they decided to hunt down the boy's homeroom teacher to talk about the potential they saw in the boy. When they mentioned it, Aizawa couldn't help but sigh as he shook his head with what 13 could have sworn was a smile. "You're the third person to tell me about the problem child's potential today, 13. If you're serious about this kid, you'd do best to hurry and snag the role as mentor now, before the kid drowns in offers. Besides, it's looking like All Might's got his eyes on the kid, even if he's trying to act like he doesn't. It's slightly amusing actually, when you think about it. The only person who doesn't see the kid's potential is the kid himself. As his teacher, I'd love to see him get some confidence that doesn't rely on Bakugo, but with no Bakugo at all, the kid practically shuts down." Aizawa was staring off into space now as he trailed off, letting 13 ponder everything he told them. It was true that in the 5 days they'd seen the class, the two boys had been together through it all, and it had been especially apparent when they were in the conflagration zone. Together the previous day, Midoriya hyperventilating and holding on to both the dummy and Bakugo for dear life as the ashen blonde simply carried him out of a burning building as though the fires reminded him of some unseen and unbeatable enemy. 13 had asked about the sudden crack in the usually calm and collected boy's personality, learning of the boy's pyrophobia and feeling instantly guilty that they had sent the boy into such a situation, going out to search for the boy and apologize profusely, only to be met with an apology from him. 13 had told him scars like that don't just heal and there would always be something lingering, but to not let the fear paralyze him, but rather motivate him. The boy had thanked them for their kind words, promising to keep it in mind as he grew with practice and experience. 13 was certain that with more time and practice, the boy could be a great hero, with a versatile quirk and good heart. Which lead to one as final day at the USJ, all the students far more confident as they stepped into the building than the beginning of the week. They were met by 13 as they had before, but Izuku couldn't help but feel like something was. It was like the static on a TV, only there was no sound and it was in the air around the USJ, making his gut twist in unease. He called out to Aizawa, knowing the man would heed his words with far more weight than 13 might. Something's not right, Aizawa-sensei. The air. It feels so wrong, Aizawa-sensei. But Izuku was cut off with his own cry as he felt a sharp pain across his body, the air around them feeling like it was slicing reality, and Izuku could feel every single molecule cutting into his skin, though he knew it would leave no trace as he could sense a large number of figures suddenly within the USJ, and the static air was closer to them and condensed. Regaining his composure, Izuku couldn't help but look around fruitlessly, trying to pinpoint where the static air was coming from as Aizawa spoke urgently, turning to face 13 and the rest of the students. 13, evacuate the students and alert main campus. They're jamming the airwaves. Go. I'll hold them off. The class began to follow 13, when Izuku sensed the static air's condensed form appear in front of them. Everyone stopped and Izuku felt like keeling over at the small pinpricks of pain all around him, but he couldn't. Not when everyone was in danger and there were at least 100 villains all around the USJ. I'm terribly sorry for the intrusion, children. I am Kurojiri, and we are the League of Villains, but I assure you we are not here for you. We simply wish to dispose of the symbol of peace, and we will leave you in, well, you'll be alive. Izuku had to think through the pain. Had to think of something to get them out of there. Taking a deep breath, Izuku expanded his area of focus, searching for anything that would give them an edge and get away. And as 13 activated their quirk to SCK Kurojiri away, he felt it, a solid mass of metal within the static. Izuku had no doubt that if he were to hold the villain in place, Ida would be able to speed past, but he didn't know if the doors would open fast enough or if his classmates would be able to make it unseen. The villain had done something to 13, Izuku could feel it in his gut as their first and only line of defense went down. Thinking desperately, he formulated an idea as he reached out with one hand and took hold of the metal within the static, ignoring the sharper pain as he willed it upwards, feeling the static mass and the metal go in the direction he wanted. With his other hand and his feet, he willed the ground to form a passage through the earth and out into the open air he knew was on the other side of the door, shouting as he kept control of the metal, though he could feel a headache form through the adrenaline as the entity tried in vain to struggle. Ida, run ahead of everyone and alert the main campus. Everyone else, follow him and get 13 to safety. I can hold him if you guys hurry. I'll close the path behind you so you aren't followed, so go. He could tell Kaken was about to argue before he spoke again with every ounce of anger and authority he could. Kaken, do as you're told and go. With a small grunt of disapproval, he could sense his classmates moving through the passageway he created, closing it behind them as he'd said before, turning his entire focus on the entity he was currently keeping in one place, willing the air around it to stay as it should be, silently hoping his classmates hurried. The entity known as Kurojiri decided the best way out of the situation he was in was to sweet-talk the boy, knowing any half-butted spoiled kid would eat up the charm and compliments and blunder with their quirk. An elemental's quirk, eh? It's quite impressive, boy, though why you'd risk yourself for those nobodies is beyond me. You surely know my associates won't hesitate to kill you, and it would be such a shame to lose such talent. Izuku said nothing, determined to keep his focus as he could hear and sense the battle being waged beyond the now familiar stairs. The boy's resolve and focus stunned the villain, thinking bitterly to himself that it would make the kid a respectable hero, if he would live that long. It got to the point where he didn't know how long he had been there containing the villain or how far his classmates had gotten. All Izuku knew was that this was his mission and he had to hold out for as long as possible. In reality, it had been roughly 6 minutes before the doors behind Izuku burst open as he sensed more figures approaching, with one large figure practically radiating power, stepping into the UI. The pro-heroes had arrived, and All Might was filled with fear as he led the teachers to the building. He had known something was off when neither 13 nor Aizawa had responded to his calls, and the 18 children and an injured 13 had confirmed that suspicion, telling him and Nezu everything, including that Izuku Midoriya was still at the USJ with Aizawa, having provided an escape route and holding a warping villain by himself. All Might was terrified that they wouldn't make it in time and the two left alone would be injured or worse, and he had to run in with a smile as always, though the thought of losing Midoriya had somehow shattered his heart as he decided that was something he could not allow to happen. The teachers made quick work of the villains as All Might fought something described as a Nomu. Nezu had come along with a contraption with a purpose he wouldn't explain until he held it to where Izuku had been keeping the warping villain at bay, trapping them as the student collapsed and passed out, drained completely from the needle-thin pain and the effort of keeping such a strong enemy contained. Once the villains were rounded up and the police escorted to where they were held and lead away, All Might took the young boy in his arms as they returned to campus and Recovery Girl's office. Looking at the boy in his arms, All Might made the decision he'd been holding off ever since he'd met the boy in that alleyway 2 years ago. The courage and self-sacrifice young Midoriya had shown today was the last proof he needed to know Midoriya was not only worthy of being a true hero, but the one All Might was meant to pass on his quirk too. As All Might handed the boy over to Recovery Girl, he set out to find someone he knew he'd have to confront if he wanted the boy to be his successor. He couldn't help but gulp nervously as he set out to find Inko Midoriya, silently hoping the woman would be as kind to him as she was to her students.